Can I hear me?
Not through the system. That's better.
Are we good to go? Yes. Good morning everyone and welcome to the Vision Planning Growth and Environment Committee meeting for Monday the 9th of September 2024. In terms of health and safety, if the alarm goes off, everyone make their way out of the exit onto Cameron Road, turn right out the door and head down to the corner of Cameron Road and 2nd Avenue please, and wait there until the emergency is finished. Be aware that this meeting is being live streamed and the video will be publicly available on YouTube. Members, could you please speak clearly into your microphones and only one person speaking at any one time. And now I'd like to ask Councillor Baker to do the opening karakia.
Tamari e tātou, tēnei wiki hau, ka tika whai whakaro tonu ana ki tō tātou kingi Māori atu heitia, haere atu rā. O te rā ti hei mauri ora ki tō tātou kuini hau a ngā waihonu i te pō. Mihina kia tātou kua whai wai i tēnei ata ki te wānanga, ki te kōrero i pāna ki ngā kaupapa kei mua i a tātou, tō tātou hui tuatahi mō tēnei committee. Mihi ana kia koutou katoa. O tira ki te kaupapa o te Ames Games o tēnei wiki, ko te manako ka tutuki pai, ngā ahuatanga katoa mō rātou ngā tamariki e tākoro ana i tēnei wiki. Nō reira, ai raru i tērā, me tuku karakia kia timata pai ai, kia wānanga pai ai tātou katoa i tēnei rā. I te māngai ka inoi kia koe kia manakitea mai mātou i tēnei ata, a manakitea o mātou whānau kei ngā kainga maha, a manakitea e rā e mawiwi ana, e rawa kore ana, e pani ana, uhia mai o tō mai rangi ata whaikirungi i a mātou katoa i tēnei rā, kororia ki tō ingoa tapu. Āmine. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Now I'll move on to apologies. I have two apologies for this morning. Deputy Mayor Jen Schooler and Councillor Makaire Sydney. Are there any other apologies this morning? May I have a mover for the apologies, please? Councillor Baker, seconder. Councillor Schooler. Thank you. Public forum. We have no public forum this morning. Acceptance of late items. We have no late items this morning. Confidential business being transferred into the open. Is there any confidential business being transferred? No confidential business. Change to the order of business. Is there any? There is no change to the order of business this morning. Thank you. May I have declarations of conflict of interest, please? There are no. Therefore, we'll move on to the business of the day. 8.1, Vision Planning and Growth Environment Committee Draft Program. Staff member Christine Jones will speak to this. Christine?
Good morning, councillors and Mayor. So this is... turn yours off. Thank you. This is a proposed work program. You'll see down the left-hand column of the attachments, we've identified the key areas that relate to the terms of the reference of this committee, being growth, transport, environment and other. And within that, we've split it up into a range of different sort of key areas that we think will occur over time. We note that there will be the need probably for some workshops, and they're identified separately in italics in red. There'll be some matters that will come to you first as a workshop and then subsequently for decision making. We've probably got the first few months. There might be a little bit much on October and November. We may need to spread those out a little bit as we do the work and understand just how long each of those sessions might take and how much time is scheduled for the meeting. And on the far right column, there are some matters there that we know will need to come to this committee, but we're not quite sure on timing. It's dependent on a range of factors, so of the update from government in terms of planning and housing and RMA reform that will come as there's relevant information. We've got some work around Te Tumu, which is dependent on a number of factors, and similarly we've got some work happening in terms of developer agreements that are underway and in progress, and when they're ready they'll come through. So we'll just keep those as a watching brief and at the right time slot them into a time slot. we're also conscious that you haven't had any material yet because this is your first meeting and there's quite a lot on this agenda in terms of both the growth update and the transport major projects. And from those, you may have questions or you may seek further workshops or further reports, and once we've got that direction, we'll populate the further months. So I'm sure there'll be more than enough to go there, but we didn't want to predetermine what you might want to see, and some of the things in those first few months are things that you've informally indicated that you wish to have some conversation about. So we'll just take your guidance. So the resolution is just seeking endorsement of this broad direction and noting that it will continue to be updated and we'll keep bringing it back. We're thinking on a form 6 monthly it'll come back formally, but it'll be live and we'll just be incorporating your feedback as you provide it to us about things you want to focus on. Happy to take any questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Christine. Do I have any questions from the council? Councillor Crowther.
Yeah, just a quick question through the chair. I noticed under the environment heading it's got 3 waters, planning and infrastructure to support growth. Just thinking, should that be in the growth section? Or, I mean, I guess I'm just interested in whether there is an aspect to that around environment or whether it's just a growth issue.
It's a bit of both, probably. So the 3 waters planning around the consent and renewing those consents in terms of the impact on the natural resources, particularly from the water takes, would be particularly an environmental issue. But the infrastructure and upgrades of plants, so that everything always crosses over. Yeah. Environment is never separate, so yeah.
Do I have any more questions? No more questions. Can I have a mover for this, please? Councillor Crowther and Councillor Taylor. Councillor Crowther, do you wish to speak to the motion? No. Councillor Taylor? No. Any other councillor wish to speak to the motion? If not, all those in favour, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is passed. Well done. Move on to 8.2. Oh, sorry, missed a piece. I missed that.
Yeah.
8.2. Staff Andy Mead and Christine Jones are going to speak to this.
I'll give a little bit of an introduction and Andy and I probably tag team it. So every quarter we do an update to the relevant committees. So now it's the Vision Planning and Growth and Environment Committee on all of the initiatives that are happening in the growth, land use and transport strategy end. So that's the transport strategy in the early phases of planning for urban growth. Once a project's been defined, it moves into either business as usual or major projects transport, which is the next report on your agenda. That's sort of how that transitions from one place to another. What this report, in the covering report, the team have identified sort of the key current issues and given you an update, and then there's a comprehensive schedule with every item that's in the sort of scope, what's happened since the last report, and key matters, and gives you a timeline on what's coming up. So and if there are any other matters, so this is obviously the first time you've seen this report. If you are thinking there are other items that you would have expected to see here that aren't, let us know and we can incorporate them. And as bits of pieces of work are finished, they will drop off and then they'll come through in your other project monitoring or your transport, if you like, so they'll transition from the schedule into another process. So if you're comfortable, I'll perhaps ask you to talk through the highlights that are in the covering report of those, the key relevant items, and then happy to work through the attachment and take questions on any of the particular items in the detailed schedule, if you like.
So this report, I guess, is in the context of the city's high growth environment, which you're well aware of. I guess the challenges around things like housing affordability and being able to supply sufficient housing and business land capacity. So a lot of the projects we've got here are aimed at addressing those issues. The report focuses on the progress we've made over the last 3 months. And in some areas, as I'll talk to, that progress has actually been quite significant, and projects are moving forward at a much faster pace than has been occurring previously. So I'll just quickly work through just a range of key updates on particular areas. So starting with the intensification area, which is around Plan Change 33 and our spatial plans for areas like Te Papa or Otamotai and Mount Arataki area. So over the last 3 months, Plan Change 33 to provide the medium density residential zone across the city, and also more intensification around particular centres such as the CBD down the Te Papa Peninsula, has become fully operative. That supplies something in the range of 350,000 plan-enabled development capacity units, so new houses that could be built. Of course, it will never be built out to that extent, but it provides significantly towards I guess the urban development needs and housing needs of the city, and the industry are already responding to that. There are quite a number. There'll be tens of developments underway. Most of them are two-level terraced housing development. A lot of those are in Te Papa, but spread around the city. I guess from the perspective of Plan Change 33, we won't continue to report on that because that project is finished. That doesn't mean there won't be further changes to our planning rules around intensification, and of course we've got government reforms coming up that may affect the medium density residential standards and our development capacity needs, and I'll talk to that later. So there may be some I guess new projects in that space. Just quickly around intensification, more broadly, we had expected Kaingaora to play a significant role from an urban development perspective in delivering intensification. With the new government's direction, that is unlikely to be the case, and the new government is more focused on the community housing sector to deliver. In Tauranga, we have Accessible Property Limited, who own most of the ex-Housing New Zealand stock, particularly down to Papa, and we're working closely with them, and they're working with other parties in government to try and unlock that opportunity. I guess the other thing around intensification is in the established part of the city where we're not generally building or widening new roads, and it relies on investment in public transport, cycling, walking, that sort of thing, which is not so much aligned with the new government direction for transport investments. So there are some issues around alignment in that space, as you're aware, with Cameron Road Stage 2. So I will just leave intensification there. In terms of our Greenfield projects, quite substantial progress in this area, and firstly with the Tauriko Business Estate. So the extension of that area to provide around about 100 hectares of additional industrial land over the sort of next 10 years. That private plan change has been heard by an independent hearings commissioner, and a recommendation has been received, which will be reported to the next council meeting, so Monday next week, for decision making by yourselves as council. That plan change will be supported by the Tauriko Enabling Works, which are under construction at the moment, which will allow for around about half of that area to be developed, with the second half of that reliant on further investment, particularly transport investment by NZTA in future. On Tauriko West, so just across the other side of the road in Tauriko, again we've made significant progress with that plan change being actually a variation to Plan Change 33 being notified a little while back earlier this year. We've now got to the point where we are completed the submissions and further submissions processes, and we are preparing the documentation for a December hearing of the independent hearings panel on that project. So we are well on track to have recommendations and decisions early next year, and that plan change to enable 4,000 homes, initially 2,400 based on the enabling works, to become operative around about mid-2025. Just closing things off in terms of the Western Corridor, there are two other projects. One's Keenan Road, one is the SDP investigation. On Keenan Road, that project is a little further behind Taraka West. We are in the structure planning phase, so determining the overall kind of bones of how development would be delivered with infrastructure, various zonings, how many houses, working with the providers of things like schools, and working with the community around that plan. So we are intending to have some public open days on our preferred structure plan early next year, and we have scheduled in a session with this committee before then to work you through that project and ensure you guys are comfortable before we take that project back out to the community. Kāinga Ora have been leading the investigation of a specified development project under the urban development legislation for the broader Western Corridor area. So that's the area that encompasses the growth areas I've talked about, but also future potential growth areas up into the Western Bay, so slightly up into the hills, so areas like Upper Belk Road, Joyce and Merrick Roads. So that has capacity long term for somewhere in the range of about 25,000 homes and significantly more business land to be provided. That of course is a long-term project over the next 30, 50, sort of even 100 years to deliver that sort of level of development. The SDP is really just a different planning mechanism and implementation mechanism to deliver largely outside of the RMA, bringing together a range of existing planning tools into one piece of legislation. The recommendation for the SDP currently sits with the Minister, and the Minister is receiving advice from a number of government agencies on that. So we at this stage are just waiting to see when a decision will be made and what that decision will be. In other parts of the city, just quickly, in the Ohawiti area, there is a private plan change for around 500 homes just on the Tauranga City Western Bay boundary inside Tauranga City's jurisdiction, and that is a private plan change that will be heard probably late October, November this year, and a report to establish the independent hearings panel will be brought to the council meeting next week. Tutumu is the other large-scale greenfield growth area that we are planning at the moment. That project has a range of unique challenges and has been ongoing for some period of time. Access is a key issue, and working with Maori landowners to establish access into Tutumu through the TK14 Maori land block is the focus of work at the moment, and we anticipate bringing a report back probably through council in this instance before the end of the year. On smart growth, over the last 3 months, Smart Growth, which is that collective sub-regional partnership, has completed the update of the Smart Growth strategy, and that strategy has been adopted, including by all partners, partner councils, tangata whenua, government agencies. And now we are working on the implementation plan, which gives a bit more detail around how we intend to deliver and implement the strategy, which is obviously the key thing that we need to have outcomes on the ground. That implementation plan is being workshopped by the Smart Growth Committee later this month, and then in October it goes back to the Smart Growth Committee for endorsement. We will bring that final implementation plan back for a discussion at the next one of these particular committee meetings, and probably focus on, I guess, the most significant implications for Tauranga City in terms of actions we need to deliver. The government reform area is quite significant at this period of time. There are reforms particularly around housing, with the government's going for housing growth policy, so freeing up urban development and ensuring much more land is zoned, live zoned for development than currently everywhere across the country, and particularly in Tauranga. Going alongside that, identifying and improving infrastructure funding and financing mechanisms, and also with the third pillar of providing incentives for communities and councils to support growth, so better aligning the incentives of councils. The government is also undertaking significant reform in the resource management area space, so initially making changes and improvements to the RMAs to make it more efficient, and then working on a long-term replacement of the RMA, so a long-term replacement of New Zealand's existing statutory planning system. There is a fast-track approval bill which is looking to move developments and projects faster through that current regulatory consenting process. The council has made applications for 4 projects to be potentially listed in that legislation. Those projects are the Poterefi Sports Field and Housing Project, the Papamoa East Interchange Surplus Land Development Project, so again potentially housing and business land, the Turret Road 15th Ave transport improvements, and the Kaituna stormwater overflow in Papamoa East to Tumu. Staff are involved in a range of capacities across the government's entire reform program through unofficial kind of relationships we have, and also through formal working groups. So we're having some influence at the front end, and we will have opportunities to make submissions and be heard by select committees and the like further down the process. So I will leave my words there and hand it over to any questions there might be.
Thank you very much, Andy and Christine. Just for speed, for everyone else in the room, there's a lot in this portion of the agenda. Can you please, if you ask a question, say where you are, which paragraph or slide tile you're referring to when you ask the question, for the rest of us. So obviously open to questions now, and Councillor Morris. Councillor Kirk to follow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For convenience team, I'm on page 18, second row, plan change 33. My question relates to the decision of the Commission to write to Minister Bishop requesting that he doesn't accept the recommendations of the independent commissioners regarding zoning and building height in Mount Maunganui North. If the council was of a view that it wanted to review that portion of plan change 33, what would the best way to go about that be? And is it possible given the track requiring ministerial approval? And then I've got a question later on about something else. Thank you.
So currently the government are looking to make some amendments around, I guess, their intensification policies as it relates to housing, both in terms of making the MDRS optional, where in circumstances where the council can otherwise provide 30 years of zoned land supply, which is not the case here, but also obviously the MDRS is not applicable in this situation because we're talking about the Mount North area where we've zoned additional height, and the government are also making some amendments to the National Policy Statement for Urban Development in terms of the intensification policies, particularly along transit roads to encourage more intensification and more height, but also potentially some other changes. We expect the changes to the National Policy Statement to be notified for submissions either right at the end of this year or early next year. And they will also be supported by the next RMA amendment bill. We expect both the RMA amendment bill and the changes to the NPSUD to be operative by the middle of next year. And at that time, we'll know that, I guess, the statutory context for, I guess, those types of issues. And that, I believe, would be the appropriate time to relook at that matter.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. Just further on that matter, why, Andy, do you suggest that it would be more appropriate to leave it until after that legislation is enabled? Because there could be sort of matters in there that could make it easier for an amendment to the PC 33 to happen. It's just that, is this still a live issue? Because during the campaign there was a lot of discussion around that. Where is that at? So sort of a couple of questions tucked in there. Are you still getting lots of, fielding lots of correspondence around that matter, around the downtown Mount area, building heights?
So firstly, why I recommend waiting is because you're going to understand the new, kind of statutory framework to work in there, and that will allow us to align with that, with any particular review of this matter, if that was appropriate to occur. For example, if we were unable to show that we were able to otherwise provide 30 years of zone land supply, it may be very difficult to dezone particular areas where we've currently enabling development there. That plan change is, of course, fully operative. So it is a substantive full RMA plan change process to work through, which would take quite some time. It would not be something that could be completed ahead of those reforms becoming operative. So I think certainly waiting is the best course of action. Though of course we can undertake any sort of preparation or further kind of engagement or anything that the council may wish to direct ahead of that, if possible. The second part of your question was around whether we were fielding much correspondence around that issue. Not a lot, but there is still one or two parties who are, requesting information from council around that particular matter.
Through the chair, I'll just follow up on that response in terms of why you wouldn't progress something now. I totally agree with Andy. You would do potentially a lot of work that would be redundant. That type of work takes a lot of technical resource and is not cheap. So in terms of using ratepayer funds, it's not something that we would recommend. We'd recommend that you understand that we know it's going to change. We know the government signal this issue is clearly one they're going to focus on, so we're better to understand what that looks like, and then we can bring you options together with costs and implications and risks at that time, rather than start something and then having to redirect or abandon work that hasn't been aligned because the new legal context will supersede it.
Councillor Baker.
I have a question separate to PC 33 if we want to wrap that conversation up first. Otherwise,
Okay, then Councillor Moss.
Thank you. Just in relation to that last point, when do you anticipate that we will have some level of clarity in terms of the government's direction? Because the answer to that question may result in me foreshadowing something, Mr. Chair, in terms of additional resolution.
Yeah, I think I believe we have a February committee meeting early next year. By that time, I think we would have the draft changes to the MPSUD and the draft RMA amendment bill related to housing supply.
Thank you.
thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, tēnā kōrua. So just on page 22, referring to the Upper Wahauti urban growth area, I acknowledge that you mentioned we'll get something a bit more comprehensive later, but I'm just wanting to make sure that we're considering, the impact that another 500 homes, potentially 500 plus more vehicles, is going to have on the already pressured infrastructure. As you know, Wahauti currently has effectively only two ways in and out, and it's already hectic as it stands, which I understand this is quite a bit of a transport topic, but again, through the campaign, I heard on numerous occasions that this community is screaming out for more infrastructure, but also amenities. So are we looking at kind of like commercial options too? Because at the moment there's only the Ōhauiti shops and all those sorts of things, and we need to make sure that we're growing well with that community.
Kia ora. Yeah, so through the chair, just answering that question, I'll just take it back to some work we did 3 or 4 years ago, where we undertook the Welcome Bay and Ōhauiti planning study, which is really looking at the, I guess, the broader urban growth potential in that part of the city, and it looked at some much wider areas than just this private plan change area. It identified there was significant urban development potential out in that part of the city, but it was heavily constrained by the transport network and would require, I guess, a second, road access in and out of Welcome Bay, which is across some quite difficult country and across some challenging land, for example, some multiple owned Maori land as well. It was determined that it was cost prohibitive to undertake development at that scale, and the outcome of the Welcome Bay and Ōhauiti planning study was to focus just on the smaller Ōhauiti area, which was already part of the smart growth settlement pattern, but also with a focus on bringing more, I guess, amenities into this part of the city. So there were some investigations into a supermarket into Welcome Bay, which is sort of on again, off again, but haven't resulted in anything at this stage. Also the identification that the Ōhauiti area in particular needed a more of a local retail centre, and that will be progressed through Plan Change 38, our commercial centres work. And also that there was a significant lack of schooling opportunities, so the need for a primary school in Ōhauiti, which was accepted by the Ministry of Education, who were pursuing a range of site options. At the moment, I believe they have some budgetary constraints, so they are moving forward more slowly than we hoped. We also identified the need for, in our view, a secondary school with over 2,000 year 7 to 13 students in that part of the city, but no secondary schooling options. The Ministry of Education, because of, I guess, capacity in other schools across the city, are not aligned with our thinking there, so that particular one has not moved forward. Just moving quickly to the this particular plan change, a number of submissions have been raised in terms of the transport impacts. And it really is a balance between, the housing outcomes versus additional, I guess, congestion and wait times potentially as a result of housing happening. There are no easy answers to improving the transport network in that part of the city. The capacity constraints are largely on the state highway network, and particularly at the intersections of Poiki Road and Oropi Road with State Highway 29A. And that's not part of the network that NZTA are progressing any sort of business case planning work for at this stage. So those transport matters will be considered by the independent hearings panel that is established by the council.
Supplementary question, if that's right. Thank you. So just to confirm, like kind of that light commercial aspect of this growth that's happening on Ōhauiti will be considered as a part of what we're proposing to do in Ōhauiti. I'm not a planner, so I kind of take your guys' lead on the matter, but is it appropriate to plan for housing when the infrastructure isn't up to par, let alone the the convenience that commercial properties and things will provide for the community to kind of potentially reduce congestion issues?
Yeah, so the commercial issues, which is largely around providing a retail centre, will be progressed through a separate plan change, which is Plan Change 38, commercial land framework, and we're only just starting the work on that, so that will take some time. That will be brought back before you for some information through this committee, I believe in October. The transport network is a little bit different to, I guess, some of your waters networks, in the sense that, like, if you can't flush the toilet, that's a real problem, or if you can't turn the tap on, or if you turn the tap on and no water comes out, that's a real problem. Whereas the transport network is, you can still get to where you're going, might just take you a bit more time, and it's generally just a peak hour. So it's really about the appropriate balance of accepting some of those impacts versus the benefit of bringing more housing to a city that desperately needs it. So like I say, that will be considered by the experts that we appoint to the independent hearing panel.
Thank you.
Yes, I've got a couple of questions in relation to Plan Change 33 myself. During the letters that were exchanged to the Minister, there was reference given to qualifying matters in Mount North area. What are these qualifying matters?
I might just turn this question over to Janine Speedy, who's team leader of city planning, to speak to, if I could.
Through the chair, so the qualifying matters are set within the legislation where you may limit height or density, and there's quite a prescribed list of when you can use a qualifying matter. So in particular to Mount Maunganui North, there was a range of qualifying matters that we did investigate. So for one is the natural hazards, so flooding is identified extensively across that area, and Plan Change 27 seeks to have a rule framework, and that may limit density in some areas where a site may not be able to develop to its full potential because of the flooding identified on the site. So that's what we identified as an existing qualifying matter, for example. There was also existing what we call a plan area, which is right at the base of Mowal, and that's been in the plan for over 10 years now and has quite prescribed heights. So that's where those towers are at the top. That was also an existing qualifying matter, so exceeding that height is a prohibited activity. So those are the examples of what have been in the plan for a while. But we propose to have new qualifying matters that haven't been in the plan before, and they are really around cultural and landscape matters. And so we have proposed, or we have a Mount Maunganui environment plan area, and so that's in our coastal environment, and that limits the height to the MDRS, which is that 11 metre height limit. To give you some geographical context of where that applies, so Hopukiori, which is Mount Drury, to the base of Mowal, and Pilot Bay to the main Mount Beach, all of that area is within the coastal environment and has that, so no heights have changed within that location, so it still sits at that 11 metres, and if you encroach that, it's a discretionary activity or non-complying, so quite a difficult consenting pathway. Around Hopukiori, there's a kind of a buffer, and that's again landscape and cultural to protect that area, so that doesn't have additional height. And then along our coastal environment, so along Marine Parade, about one street back, that is also, and that follows all the way down to Papamoa, is again, that's in that coastal environment plan area, so that has again that 11 metre height limit, and if you encroach that, that's discretionary. So when you're looking at where height is enabled, it's more within the core, so along Maunganui Road and some of the side streets. But again, there's some limitations in that area because we have existing qualifying matters, which is our view shaft. So those again have been in the plan for about over 10 years now, and that limits height from, we have a view shaft from our marae and significant cultural sites across the city to Mowal. So there are places along that core as well that will have limitations in height. So there's quite a few, it's a mixing pot of qualifying matters that may limit height and density along that Mount Maunganui North area.
Thank you very much for that, and just a bit of a follow-up to that. You mentioned cultural view shafts. Was a detailed landscape assessment completed in relation to the 16 and 22 metre buildings had on the cultural view shafts?
Yes, so there's the existing view shafts. There was a landscape assessment done 10 years ago which identified what the height is to protect that view shaft before you encroach. In addition to that, in the preparation of Plan Change 33 and responding to submissions, there were 2 landscape assessments taken, one particularly for the Mount Maunganui North area, and also there was all of our coastal areas had a landscape assessment. So that was the landscape component, and then in terms of the cultural aspect, it was that layer really was identified, and the matters that were to be considered if you encroach height was with undertaken with local iwi and hapu in terms of identifying and understanding those cultural values, and that all took into account if there was to be additional height enabled within the area.
Thank you. Mayor Mahi.
Thank you, through the chair. I just interested in discussing this, I guess, around this Plan Change 33. My understanding is around about 67% of the land that has been rezoned is under qualifying matters. And so my question is that correct? And then there was a map issued with Chris Bishop's decision that had sort of the greyed out area. Is that also correct that those greyed out areas would be up to the MDRS rules?
Through the chair, so again it comes back, there's a bit of a mixing pot. So how the minister, he identified, or that map identifies where there's a qualifying matter that that limits the height. It's not all cases that it will limit the height down to just the MDRS. In some of those areas that are shown within that map, the height may be able to go to say 4 stories, for example, but they're limited by the view shaft. So there's quite a few layers that need to be considered, but the map is correct in that it identifies where height will be limited from what is the permitted height within the high density residential zone rules.
Is this related to Plan Change 33? Okay, yeah. Councillor Steve Morris.
Thank you. What was the hurry in terms of the former governance of this organisation writing to Minister Bishop on the day that nominations closed for election? Could that decision by the Commission to request that have been delayed for the incoming council to make, or were there significant time constraints that required it to be made at that time?
So yeah, through the chair, this is a unique plan change. The legislation was specifically written through the Enabling Housing Supply Amendment Act, and it had very clear direction. So every Tier 1 council has directions which can be found on the Beehive website, where council had to make a decision by a certain date. So we were working to those dates. So there was I'm going to get this wrong, but there was a June date where, I can't remember the exact day, but there was a June date that council had to make a decision on the independent hearing panel's recommendations. So that was legislated.
Thank you very much, Janine. Now I have a question in relation to paragraph 9. I can't remember what the page it's on, but it's at the beginning.
This is in the report.
This is in the page 14.
Spatial plan.
It's just in relation to spatial plans. At the back, towards the end of that, it mentions New Zealand Health business case for future of a Tauranga hospital. Going back to a meeting August 14, 23, the council was waiting for a business case from the New Zealand Health by July 24. Have we received a report back from New Zealand Health by July 24 in relation to Hospital development?
So that is the hospital's process to do a business case, so it's not something that TCC would receive, but we would be probably made aware of that. So our understanding is that that timeline is being extended, and we haven't had any formal written correspondence from them as to the likely timing of completion. We're having some informal conversations, but that's their process.
So at this stage, there's no process of offering a longer term lease to Racing New Zealand, Tauranga Racing?
So the resolutions that were passed by the previous council were that there would be a lease entered into which had an ongoing 15-year lead time, so at any point in time there've been 15 years. So this has been managed by Places and Spaces. That lease term has been offered, but Racing Tauranga haven't taken that up, so we're just carrying on with the previous arrangements. But there's been a clear understanding that that from a point where there's a decision made, either if a decision is made by Health New Zealand that they do not need the site for a hospital, then at that time council would enter into a long-term lease for the hospital, for the racecourse, sorry. If Health New Zealand decides that it does require the site, then there would still be a 15-year lease term for Tauranga Racing, and then you would have discussions and negotiations about how that transition might occur. But so both pathways are open, and the issue probably is around the timing in which Te Whatiora will make a decision.
Thank you very much, Christine. Are there any other questions? Councillor Shaw?
Yeah, thank you through the chair. Just on key updates, just 5A, just Portarefi. Obviously, I think we're well aware of the history. Originally bought 4 fields, and then now, due to a number of reasons, a combination of sports fields and housing project. Just in the planning stages, I suppose, when what would be identified as key amenities around sports and providing for that greater community need other than housing, when that disappears, is there a corresponding process now to look to find replacements in that space for sports and amenities at the moment, or is it just go on hold?
Yeah, I can answer this generally. So firstly on the Portarefi project, before we move forward with, I guess, the previous council's direction on that, we will be bringing it back through the committee so you can understand and provide your views on that. But the work on sports field needs for the city, supply and demand work is done and sort of updated around about every 3 years. So that works across the whole city, looks at each kind of different sports code, how it's growing, looks at population growth and those sorts of things, looks at where the city's growing, and then projects how many fields are required at various points in the future. And then further work is done to identify where those fields will be located across the city. So in terms of this area, with potentially less fields happening in Bethlehem, currently 3 on Portarefi, it has been identified that further fields would be required in Taraka West, and there is budget available or provided for in the current LTP to acquire land for that.
Thank you very much. Councillor Morris?
Thank you, through you, Mr Chair. Just in relation to key update 5B, underneath Councillor Shawler's A, around that growth funding workshop, will we have information at that workshop to be able to discuss the sequencing of development contributions in contrast to the current environment where you have building impact fees, subdivision impact fees? And secondly, as part of that workshop, will we have any information around the capacity of local developers to adapt to a front-loaded development contributions at time of subdivision regime, including their balance sheet capacity to do that? Is that something that we could get some sort of an indication on at that workshop?
This matter comes up regularly,
Yeah.
so we do have information.
Great.
I think it came up in the term of the last council, so we can bring that information to you. I guess I just would say that transitioning from current arrangements to front loading everything at the subdivision stage is something that would take quite a period of time, because there's a lot of sections that have been either built or already consented. And there's obviously be winners and losers out of that, as you are alluding to, I guess. But yes, we'll bring that information as part of that workshop.
Thank you. Councillor Crowther. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, thanks, Andy. Question in terms of Keenan Road on page 23-24. I understand how this will be different to Tariko West in that it'll be using a development contributions model. What are your estimates as of now for the various key components, so the transport component, the water and wastewater component, and the stormwater component, just in rough ballpark numbers?
I don't have particular estimates, and that's still work in progress, because some of the infrastructure planning work is still being to be finalised for either the capex cost and what would be the development contribution cost. The short answer is that it's going to be very high. I think where you look at new Greenfield areas in Tauranga or anywhere else in New Zealand, Hamilton, Auckland, etc., you're starting to see development contributions of around about $100,000 per lot, maybe a little bit less, maybe quite a lot more, but it will be in that order. And that's probably quite consistent with the work that was done through the SDP, without getting into the detail of that. Obviously, if TCC led it under the standard RMA kind of planning model, and we were responsible for infrastructure delivery, yes, it would most probably be a standard development contribution model, because of the fragmented land ownership and the need for council to coordinate and lead infrastructure delivery. Obviously, with Three Waters reform and the potential SDP, that might change how funding looks in an area like that.
Follow. Yeah, just follow up on that, please. So, given that it's not in the long-term plan, and given we're talking presumably hundreds of millions of dollars, and given that the government is putting pressure on for us to have zoned land ASAP, do you think at this stage that we would want to look at bringing that area into the long-term plan period to 2034?
So we wanted to have this area in the long-term plan. I believe the last council did as well, but there was the financial constraints were the reason that it didn't make it. So if there was a way to bring that in within our financial envelope, that would be, I think, something we would support from the perspective of delivering the growth need and demand across the city. Obviously, there's a range of other things to balance as well around what investment is prioritised by council.
Another follow-up, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Councillor Crowther, yes.
Thank you. Yeah, just you kind of answered it in the sense of if we would like that, you would support it. I'm interested in, at this stage, do you see that as being likely to be essential to meet the numbers of dwellings? Like, if we were just neutral on it, would you be pushing it forward?
I think there's two questions in there. Is it essential to meet the number of dwellings? It's essential, and we still won't meet the number of dwellings because we'll still be short. Investment in infrastructure for growth is about how you want to make your overall investments in your city, and it's balancing those growth areas with other growth areas and with meeting the needs of existing ratepayers. That's a political decision. It's not one that we would give an opinion on. So if you were asking us a question about is it a sensible investment for growth, the answer is yes. Is it on balance across all of council's investment a priority? That is only something that you can make a decision on. That's not for us to form a view about your balance of investment across the entire capital program.
No, I through the chair, I understand that. I was just interested in teasing out from a growth-only perspective at the moment. Yeah, thank you.
So from a growth-only perspective, yes, it's part. So from a growth-only perspective, you would progress as many of the planned growth areas as you can, because even with that, we'll still be short of meeting the NPS UD requirements, National Policy Statement of Urban Development, and a long way off meeting the 30-year land supply, which the Minister is now progressing and is likely to be in the next lot of RMA amendments. Yep.
Mayor Mahe?
Thank you. Yeah, I've just got a two-pronged question, I guess, and just wondering if you can, just for clarity, one, we've heard this growth pays for growth a lot. So can you explain why growth hasn't paid for growth up until now, and is there a meaningful pathway that growth will actually pay for growth going forward, and what do we have to change to get that?
Sure. So development contributions have been the key tool to use to ensure that growth does pay for the infrastructure costs associated with providing for growth. The way development contributions sit under the Local Government Act, and when we consider how much development contributions should be versus the use of other, I guess, funding tools like rates, we have to consider not just who causes the need or why we're doing the investment, but also who benefits from it. So, for example, if we're building something for growth, but the broader community are also going to benefit, then cost is allocated through rates and other mechanisms to the broader community. So that's, I guess, one reason. There's a couple of other things. So one of the challenges has always been accurately assessing what infrastructure costs are going to be. So take a urban growth area like Papamoa, for instance, which was zoned in the early 1990s and is still being developed today. At that time, the planners and engineers at that time did a structure plan, identified the infrastructure needs, and then costed those and started taking development contributions. As you can imagine, the infrastructure costs have changed substantially over time and generally gone up a lot more than was anticipated, including the land component of infrastructure, where we're buying land for roads, stormwater, that sort of thing. So there's been a substantial undercollection of development contributions because costs have escalated a lot more than was, I guess, anticipated. Another thing, and probably this is one of the key things, is that developers can lock in current development contribution charges for a very long period into the future. So if you come in with a subdivision consent for 500 or 1,000 lots, you lock in, at the time you lodge that consent, the development contribution it is today. Even if it increases in the future, you do not get charged that increase. So those are probably three of the key reasons. There's also a range of, I guess, other reasons. In some instances, we had budgeted for NZTA financial assistance. So NZTA subsidy is sort of 50% for roading improvements or new roads in Greenfield areas. NZTA in recent years has changed its policy not to subsidise those, so that's left a funding gap for some projects.
I think the other point through the Chair is that as part of the work programme of the Growing for Housing Growth, there is work happening on the development contributions sort of framework stuff. We have been informally involved in giving our input on the areas where we think there could be some improvements to ensure that growth does pay for growth better than it currently does, and to improve our ability to collect. So we understand that will also be part of the package of changes that might be out early in the new year with a view to sort of mid next year, as we understand that is likely time frame.
So I guess the second part of that question, so understanding those issues, how can we mitigate those and how can we change it so that we do have that facility that growth does pay for growth going forward? Obviously, we've mentioned the legislative changes, but is there anything we can do under the current framework to change some of these issues? Because obviously the ratepayer is currently subsidising growth.
So we've done a range of things. So more recently, the way we're doing our citywide development contributions for big projects like the Waiari water treatment scheme is that we've only started charging them when the project's been delivered. So you know what the project cost is going to be before you start charging, and therefore you can't undercollect from the perspective of underestimating what your project cost is. But the big thing that we're doing is that we're moving away from development contributions being our key, I guess, funding mechanism for growth in most large new Greenfield areas. So in Terraco West, in Tutumu, and in the majority of the Terraco Business Estate extension, there will be developer delivery and direct funding, so not via council, of all of the infrastructure needs, and that means that the cost and the risks sit with the developer rather than council.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kodak.
That sounds like a good way to avoid that risk. But early on, Andrew, you were saying that these amounts are locked in at the start of the development. Is that through legislation? So does that avoid us having reviews and updates to those costs along the whole as the development's rolled out, so we can't actually increase it? Is that right?
So we can increase our development contribution charge, and we review our policy annually and adjust those charges. The issue is when a consent application is made, that locks in that development contribution charge for that particular development over the lifetime of which development happens, which could be, 5 or 10 years, say. That was a change that was made when the legislation was reviewed back in, I think, 2013. Previously, we could, every time a stage of the subdivision came in, you could you charge your operative DC charge. And they wanted developers, the political will at that time, of government was to give more certainty to developers. It is an issue that we have directly raised through the current review of the DC kind of system, so we're hoping to see some movement on that issue.
Well, thanks.
I think just picking up on the other point that was raised by Councillor Morris, the benefit of having citywide and building consent fees is that those building ones can be updated and are charged at the time the house building consent is put in rather than at the time of subdivision. So that provides a greater ability to collect more based on updated costs. So yeah, so I suppose what we hopefully are conveying is we are constantly working on what else that we can do to ensure that the costs of growth fall as fairly as possible, but the systems and arrangements and particularly the legal frameworks are such that you can't, and that's absolutely be recognised by the government in the work that it's currently undertaking to try to address some of those. So how successful that is, we'll have to wait and see what comes out.
Yeah, through the chair, just I think to provide wider context around growth, not paying for growth. What we've seen over the last decade is the Crown, through numerous initiatives, including the Housing Infrastructure Fund, the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund, Shovel Ready, Regional Investment, invest in a range of different projects which actually, through grants, have supported growth as well. And so Papamara East Interchange, Terraco West Enabling, Cameron Road Stage 1 are all arguably growth projects that were heavily subsidised by the Crown.
Taxpayer.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. Just following on the Kenan Road, just want to focus a little bit on the, I think you mentioned earlier that you couldn't do the same thing as you're doing in Tauriko West as far as the owner/developers go. Do you want to just give me a minute or two on why it might be too difficult?
So in Tauriko West and Tutumu, 90-95% of the land is owned by 3 landowners respectively, and those three different landowners. In Kenan Road, there's roughly about, well, at last count, it's probably a bit more now, but there's roughly about 80 landowners. And the idea around requiring developers, in Kenan Road, a lot of them are not developers, whereas in the other 2 areas, they generally are developers. So where you want developers to deliver their own infrastructure, they still need to deliver it in accordance with the structure plan, So it's coordinated and it provides for development of the whole area. It's relatively easy, although it's not that easy, to get 3 parties to coordinate and to agree how they're going to share costs, stage and deliver infrastructure, etc. To get 80 people together, many of those who might be orchardists or lifestyle block owners or have no interest in development, is not really possible. And a lot of that infrastructure will need to be delivered across many of those different land blocks. You know, over time, you're likely to see developers, some developers do own land in there, and some developers might get in and buy more land. So I guess things might change over time, the opportunity. But unless you get the majority of that land owned by a few developers, it's quite a difficult task, particularly when you think about where infrastructure needs to be located. So stormwater generally at the bottom of the catchment. So it might be providing for a land or landowners further up, but located on someone else's land. Yeah, the same with wastewater pump stations and things like that. So yeah, it really requires everyone to be pulling in the same direction, and it's pretty difficult when you've got that many people involved.
Sorry, are there any particularly large landowners in that block?
There's even most of the developers only own like 4 or 6 hectares or something like that. So maybe 4 hectares might be equivalent to 100 homes. There's one landowner who does own a larger amount of kiwi fruit orchard, but they are not the logical first landowner to develop due to the topography and access issues in there. But even them would be probably less than 20%, maybe only 10 or 15% of the development capacity of the overall Kennan Road area.
Thank you very much. Councillor Shorter.
Yeah, sort of a follow-up question to Mayor Drysdale. Understanding the complexity of the balancing out between, you know, if it's a rating is chosen for your, you know, as a proportion significant across everyone. So the development contributions, I think you said there were 3 main sort of areas. One, obviously, developers locking in the rates, but in terms of overall growth paying for growth, not quite meeting it now, do you have an understanding of the sort of quantum of how far behind you are? I know that's a broad question, but how far behind the 8 ball is that current model?
Yeah, we do. We'll bring that information to the growth funding workshop session next time, because I don't want to get those numbers wrong. But we are collecting well over 80, I think close to 90% of the growth costs. So I guess in percentage terms we're doing pretty well, but that number of under collection is still a pretty big number, tens of millions of dollars.
Thank you very much. Mayor Mahe.
Yeah, just we're obviously talking about this, is it SPD, is it? Area. Is that in Tauranga City Council's bounds at the moment, or is that Western Bay?
So it's through the chair, that's a wee bit of both. It encompasses the existing growth areas of Tariko West, Kennan Road and the 2BE extension, but it also goes a little bit further up into the hills, into Upper Belt Road, Joyce and Merrick, which those 3 areas are in the Western Bay district.
Thank you. Councillor Morris.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Back in 2022, Council wrote to MFE, or I think then Minister David Parker, requesting that there be an extended time frame around Plan Change 33 to the 30th of June 2024, and around the same time applied for an extended time frame for Variation 1, Tauriko. Was that granted through to 2025, Variation 1? And then the second one's a loaded one.
Yeah, so the Variation 1 for Tariko West, our time frame is, I think, 31 December
31
2025,
December 2025.
but we have earlier timeframes associated with various funding agreements, so we're looking to complete that by 30 June next year.
So it would be really good, in my view, through you, Mr. Chair, to get some background as to why the council requested an extension through to June 2024. When that letter was written in December 2022, they were aware that the Commission would be expiring at the end of June and an elected governance would take over in July. So I would request as part of that briefing that we get a background as to why 30th of June was the date that was requested and not further on. That would be very beneficial, I think, in terms of transparency and an open discussion. Thank you.
Through the chair, I can provide some comments if that's appropriate. So the timeframes, and Janine might like to come up and assist me here, but we're largely driven by staff, where we're seeking longer timeframes due to the amount of work involved. The previous council were keen to conclude Plan Change 33 much earlier than it did conclude. So yeah, I believe those timeframes were driven by staff.
I can provide the dates, but there were separate extensions requested for Variation 1 to Plan Change 33, so I'd have to check the dates, because it was definitely after 22, where Plan Change 33, which we called the substantive Plan Change 33, where we sought the extension. And the reason for that extension was the complexity of the submissions that we had received and what those submissions were seeking in terms of additional technical work that was required, and that was primarily around the landscape matters and also commercial or economic assessment around the commercial centres and what those commercial centres are to give effect to Policy 3. And also the other reason is through the chair of the independent hearings panel, we saw real value in expert conferencing. So before we released the Section 42A hearings report, we had a number of expert conferencing sessions, and that was on landscape matters, the economic assessment, it was also on the transport provisions, and that was the reason why staff sought the extension. So we remapped our timeframes of how much time we needed to get the hearing and get the recommendations back from the independent hearings panel.
So just for absolute clarity, that 30th of June request, or the request to 30th of June 2024, was based entirely on technical requirements to be able to get all of that information for those independent commissioners. Were there any other considerations around the table at that time?
As Janine and Andy said, so the commissioners, the council of the day, was wanting to progress as quickly as possible, primarily because it provided intensification and dealt with the housing supply, created greater housing supply capacity, so their focus was on addressing that, which was one of the matters that was in the terms of reference of the commission to address. And the staff asked for it to be moved out because we wanted to progress, the technical work was taking longer, and so originally it was going to be either late, it was about 6 months prior was what was originally the intended timeline, and we asked for it to be moved out so we could do that technical work more thoroughly and to manage some of the risks that might appear if we hadn't done the expert conferencing and other matters. And we can provide you those reports, they all went through public council meetings.
Also, if I may, through the chair, the information requested from Ministry for the Environment staff is to provide a table of very clear timeframes. in terms of we anticipate we need 6 weeks. So every step of our process had to be mapped out and the timeframes needed, and then that additional information was required by the Minister to be able to get the extension. We had to quite clearly map out how much time we needed to be able to finish that process within the required, within those timeframes. So, and that was quite a detailed going back and forward, wanting it quite specific information of, well, why do you need an extra 3 weeks to be able to complete, a certain task in the total process.
Thank you, Councillor Crowther.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On page 28, it says revisiting growth funding allocations for certain waters assets funded through citywide DCs is one of the areas of investigation. Can you give a bit of an inkling on, what are you thinking in terms of that area, the implications potentially of that?
So what we're looking at there is whether any of our planned waters capex could be funded more by development contribution, so greater share of development contribution funding. That is something that may or may not come through the next review of the DC policy, because we're also in this waters reform space, and I guess if waters reform is implemented, and depending how that is implemented, there's likely to be a move away from development contributions and move towards whatever funding mechanisms are set up for a new water entity, which would most likely include something like a development contribution, but it would be potentially different.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Sorry, going off on a slightly different track, page 35. There's a resolution here, or a motion, that recommends Wakatahi to Wakatahi that a 4-lane bridge over a Maunganui stream is constructed in stage 2 rather than the proposed 2-lane replacement bridge. Have we got any update on that, whether we've got a 2 or 4-lane bridge, and then obviously if it's a 2-lane, how, what they're doing to enable that to be 4-lane at some point?
So through the chair, yes, so NZTA have been out to the market to get suppliers to assist with this. The decision from NZTA's perspective is that it will be 2-lane and future-proof for 4-lane. This resolution was passed by TCC, but a similar resolution was also passed by Smart Growth. We've requested that we be provided with the design for the future-proofing, and our technical staff will look over it and give feedback to. We need to be satisfied that the future-proofing will provide for the projected growth and potential growth in that corridor, so that the opportunity is there. That we sent that to NZTA, that request, a few weeks ago, and still waiting a formal response, but informally they have indicated that they will let us review that and we will be able to provide feedback. So.
Yeah, it just seems very short-sighted that you build a 2-lane bridge when you know you're going to need a 4-lane bridge, and it potentially is going to be a lot cheaper to build a 4-lane bridge now than a 2-lane plus a 2-lane. So, yeah, that's...
Councillor Crowther.
Yeah, I'm wondering, Andy, if you can clarify for the public record, now that the Smart Growth Strategy has been signed off, the number of dwellings in the Tauriko area for the next 25 to 30, well, let's say 30 years, which is the time frame of the FDS. I know there's been a lot of public comment from certain areas of the community around it. My understanding is that the Tauriko West number in the strategy is 3,500, and that there is 2,000 dwellings in Keenan Road and 8,000 which are a sort of a fuzz grey area which could potentially all be developed in that Tauriko area. But that if you add those numbers together, including Keenan Road, the maximum number would be 13,500 for the 30-year time frame. Can you confirm if that is correct, and if not, give the accurate number, please?
Yeah, that is broadly correct. So we have 3,500 for Tauriko West in the strategy. We're aiming for 4,000 homes there, but it would depend a little bit on things like sports fields or schools taking up chunks of land that would otherwise be housing, and what sort of densities we get. Kenan Road, we're still working on what the likely housing number would be in that area, but yeah, 2,000 is probably at the low end. Hopefully it'll be more 2,500, 3,000. And then you're right, the other 8,000 has been allocated provisionally, I guess you could say, between the Upper Belk Road area in the Western Corridor and the proposed Eastern Town in Western Bay to address the 8,000 home housing shortfall over the next 30 years. I guess with the government's move towards 30 years of zoned land supply based on high growth projections, we may even need to plan for slightly more housing. Yeah, I think you're broadly correct there, and the rest of that housing opportunity is seen in the plus 30-year period.
Perfect. Another one?
Yep. Just keep coming down. I'm wondering if, I'm not sure if this is a question for you, Andy, or for Nick, but the transport optimisation program under the emissions reduction plan on page 32, I'm wondering what it's looking like in terms of emissions reduction, whether, given that it's replaced the vehicle kilometres travelled as the sort of primary mechanism to reduce emissions in transport, and given that Taurunga's emissions mostly come from transport, how are we looking in terms of what that plan or program shows in terms of emissions reductions?
Yeah, I'll just pass that to Sarah Dove, who is Team Leader of Strategic Transport and Infrastructure.
Hi, so through the chair, can I just clarify something, Glenn, please? Yeah. So when you talk to the emissions reduction that you're talking about, are you asking in regard to the VKT reduction plan that was then developed as an optimisation strategy, or are you referring to the policy, the ERP2 that the government has recently released?
I guess the holistic thing, so just for clarity for anyone who's listening in, that it states the previous ERP required the vehicle kilometres travelled reduction plan. With the change in government, we've now got a transport optimisation program, which has led to testing through a corridor optimisation plan. So I guess I'm presuming we're partway through a process, but presumably there is some indication at the moment of, you know, how this is all looking in terms of emissions reduction. Has there been a change in any way since the presentation a year or two back in terms of potential emissions reductions in Tauranga?
So, through the chair, so as you well know, this was originally a vehicle kilometre travelled reduction plan, and that was the original intent. With the political shift and the government changes, that we actually decided to utilise that work rather than it becoming redundant and creating more of a focus on optimisation. So we utilised that work to really understand and test on a corridor level what we could do in an optimisation sense rather than a pure vehicle kilometres reduction sense. In terms of the actual emissions reduction as a result of that work, we haven't quantified that exactly. It was more, because the scope changed, we were more looking at potential value for optimisation, so better use of the existing networks, and how we could effectively look at some low-cost, low-risk based activities to optimise. So I don't have the data here at the moment around emissions reductions exactly, but it wasn't, I guess it wasn't a key focus, but we will have some information that we can share.
Thank you, Sarah. Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The coffee will wear off soon, so I've got to pump them through while I can. It's a long bow, but can a council charge development contributions at the time of zoning, or can it charge financial contributions at the time of zoning, or no?
So the triggers for, I guess, requiring a development contribution is when a building consent or a subdivision or land use consent is granted. So you can't charge when land is zoned. You can look at sort of other mechanisms like targeted rates and things like that, but not through development contributions or financial contributions.
Mayor Bay?
Going off on a completely different track, page 18, plan change 27, which is flooding from intense rainfall. So there's a couple of things here as well. So, you know, I've spoken to a number of people. You know, one case was a person that's lived in Greerton. They've now been zoned in a flood plain, and have said they've lived there for 50 years and they've never had an issue from flooding. So I guess there's that question, you know, how is that modelling done? And secondly, you know, again, this obviously limits a lot of land that can be developed, and this is probably something I've spoken to Councillor Schuler. Like, if we, you know, is it the law that I think it's a 100-year flood? Is that correct? And then, you know, is there a way we could, you know, put something on a title, for example, and say, you know, we're actually allowing this for a 50-year flood, but if there's a 100-year flood, then there's, you know, there's that's the risk you take, because obviously this seems to limit a lot of our land.
So I guess the first thing I'd say is we've seen recently in areas like Auckland where new housing is flooded because they haven't taken appropriate account of, I guess, or modelled, you know, they got accurate flood modelling data and allowed housing to be built in areas that aren't appropriate. And in a lot of those areas, that flooding may not have ever been experienced before. And in this example in Greenfield, that may be the case as well. We do model for a 100-year flood event with climate change effects added. So things like, you know, the rainfall data being more intense. That is a requirement of our regional policy statement. So the regional policy statement is set by the Bay of Plenty Regional Council in their natural hazards component of that policy. We have to give effect to that. That's a requirement under the Resource Management Act. We've taken an approach where our flood mapping sits outside of our city plan, our district plan, to make it easier to update, so that where, you know, you might find an anomaly on a particular site where, you know, something is modelled to flood like this, but then you go and have a more closer look at it and actually, you know, it's not going to for some particular reason, so that it's easier to update. And we have a process where we regularly do that. But from our perspective, and going back to the floods of 2005, where significant flooding and as a result landslides also happened around the city and many houses were lost, we did not want to progress Plan Change 33 to enable significant intensification and put, I guess, the broader city at more risk of flooding as a result. If you are in an area that has some flooding restriction because of an overland flow path, a flood-prone area, there are ways in which you can still potentially develop. You can build upwards so that floods can go underneath. You can relocate overland flow paths away from where your building site is going to be, as long as they still can enter and exit your property and things like that. So there are still mechanisms, and many developers are still making that worse. But from our perspective, this is about giving effect to the regional policy statement, and that is something that's really a non-negotiable as far as our process is concerned. And we've, I guess, worked through most of the issues with the development sector in terms of this. There's a couple of remaining appeals which we hope are close to being settled.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw.
Yeah, I understand you've had a lot of questions on this. Just again a follow on, and again fully understanding you can't do anything about it. RPS and the climate change, those are what we have to abide by. But is there any understanding, just as a quantum, like the number that affects of, you know, of the 5,000 that we are short now, how much is because of that which is out of our control with these rules and regulations?
We know how many, and I don't have the number at hand, but we can provide it, how many properties are affected by Plan Change 27. So we can provide that, but it is a significantly greater exercise to then determine how many of those sites, if they weren't affected, might be developed, and then how many more houses you would get out of that. But it is a large chunk of the city that is impacted by Plan Change 27. I'll put that on the list and we'll bring that information back.
You.
Thank you, Andy. Councillor Morris.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just at the appropriate time, foreshadowing that I'm happy to move recommendation A plus a supplementary B and C. So just foreshadowing that.
Thank you, Councillor Morris. Are there any further questions for staff? No further questions. Thank you very much, staff. I now seek a move. Councillor Morris, can we have your B and C, please?
Yeah, sure. I can read them out. I've forwarded them to the committee secretary as well. Happy to move A as written, and an additional B. Request staff present an issues and options paper on a plan change variation relating to permitted building height limits and zoning in Mount Maunganui North in early 2025. And C, request staff present an issues and options paper on charging all development contributions at the time of subdivision and the ability to levy a targeted rate at the time of rezoning in early 2025. And if there's a seconder, I'll speak to it.
So we have a motion moved by Steve Morris, seconded by Councillor Kudak. Wait till it's on the screen.
Just that before rezoning. Sweet. Thank you. Speaking to.
Are you happy with it as it is written?
Yes, and may I speak to it?
Councillor Morris, may you speak to it, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In terms of the first one, or B, sorry, the first one that's different from what's written in the agenda, I think this resolution enables Mayor and councillors to fulfil their statements during the election period, and I think we all heard loud and clear from different parts of the Mount Maunganui community about their satisfaction or dissatisfaction with the implementation of Plan Change 23, or the recommendations on Plan Change 23 submitted to the Minister. 33, I appreciate that, thank you, Councillor Taylor. What would I do without you? I think that's an important thing that we need to look at, appreciating the fact that if, and only if, we decided to seek a variation to that, that we'd be entering into a quasi-judicial kind of decision. As we are with all things, we go in with an open mind. But the Mount North community in particular did not feel very heard in my observation and estimation, and I think that it is entirely appropriate. The democratically elected council looks at options for what we can do there in terms of the height limits at Mount North. In terms of Resolution C, I'm firmly of the view that the bank of mum and dad ratepayer is really stretched to the limit in terms of what it can effectively lend to developers in our community, and we need to look at options for reducing that burden. And we know the goal has always been growth pays for growth. It in effect doesn't, but we need to look at other options other than the status quo, because it's not working in terms of the imposition on council's balance sheet, and that includes whether targeted rates may be appropriate at the time of rezoning, because you know that the maximum of he who benefits should pay is something that I think that council should abide by. Last thing I'd say, Mr. Chair, is that these are requests for papers on the issues, not decisions on the issues, because it is entirely appropriate that we are well informed by our expert advisors. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Morris. Councillor Cuddick.
Interesting that Steve and I both independently have come up with very similar resolutions as I sent to Steve earlier this morning on both the topics. So yeah, front of mind obviously because of the election campaign process, which sort of triggered this request, and it is only for papers to come to us in terms of highlighting some of the issues involved. On the second one, regarding development contributions, it's something I sort of promoted many years ago, and unsuccessfully. It turned out to be too difficult in terms of integrating the citywide into the subdivision development fee. But you know, many years have moved on, and I've probably changed my view in terms of that. At the end of the day, it's all about the house land package, and it's not going to affect affordability. It could, you know, bring forward the an amount of money earlier that council could collect. But I think there's a. I'll just. Oh, cool. Okay. So at the end of the day, I don't think it'll have impact on housing affordability, because if you don't take it at the building consent stage, it will all be incorporated into the land. So if you take, say, 40 grand off the building consent, it allows the section seller to add that $40,000 onto the section price. So, but there are, you know, there are opportunities there other than impacting on the affordability of houses, which could be worth considering. So yeah, I'm keen to see a paper on both those matters. Thank you, Councillor Morris.
Because this is a change to the recommendations listed in the agenda, would Christine Jones wish to comment on what's been entered?
Just two comments. Oh, echoing. Resolution B.
Recommend that you remove the word variation, because the plan change is now operative. You can't do a variation to plan change 33 because legally, so you could do a new plan change. So if you, if the mover and seconder were of a mind to remove that word.
Happy.
And just on resolution C, you've already, in endorsing the work program, which was the first agenda item in October, we've got the growth funding and development workshop. And so in some ways, you've already made a decision today about that, and you could either pass this resolution or you could wait till you've had that workshop in October, because it would still be in time, and then make the decision as to whether you needed a paper. So that's up to you. I'll just point out that you have effectively already made a very similar decision on today's agenda already.
Councillor Morris.
Thanks for your indulgence. It's slightly out of order. Speaking again, but just thank you to Christine Jones for B. In terms of C, it was to provide clarity of content for that workshop. But yeah, thank you.
Mayor Mahay.
Thank you. Overall, I am supportive of the motion. I think, obviously, as a council, we should be, looking at all options, and I think obviously I reiterate Councillor Morris's views that this was a large election issue, and we should look at it again as a council to look at our options. And secondly, I think again development contributions and the ability of growth paying for growth is again should be a focus for us. I guess that the targeted rate I am guessing is effectively trying to value capture, which again may be sorted by the government as that is something that they are obviously indicating that they're looking at. So obviously it'll be interesting to see what the changes are for that. But my personal view is that both of those are things that this council should be looking at, and it's a good change to the motion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Just on those, just A and B, A obviously as is and B understand. Just with C, if we did allow the process to go through as just outlined, and a workshop providing a broader context for us to consider rather than just the specific issues that are presented there, I would prefer to see, I don't know how I would ask for this, but if A and B were there, but C, understanding that work is already in the pipeline and leaving that to come to us as a broader discussion that then we can work through maybe a smoother and a better way to approach what the councillors are after. Thank you.
Clarification.
Yeah,
so Christine, by passing this resolution won't basically impact on what the proposal is from staff?
Yes, Councillor. Sorry, Christine.
Yeah, so my thinking of how I would translate what you're asking for is that we would do a workshop in October, and you can't make decisions in workshops, so they're just for information. So we'd bring you information, we would address in that workshop the matters that have been raised in the meeting today. This resolution, if you pass it, would just sit on the books, and then in that workshop you might ask for some more information, and then we would then turn that into an issues and options paper, which is what this resolution is, which is a decision-making paper that would come back, and probably we'd be looking at as it is early in the new year, because by then we may have the bill for the development contribution legislative changes, which would make a difference. So if you're comfortable with that's how we're interpreting, 2 steps. First resolution you've already passed today is a workshop in October, making sure that we specifically make sure we cover the items that have been raised today, feedback and some signals from you from the October, which would then flow through into possibly Marchish, if that's when the legislation's out, all coming together with a formal issues and options report for a decision to be made.
Cool.
If you're comfortable with that?
Yeah. Thank you.
Councillor Crowther.
I think Christine kind of covered off. I was going to suggest pretty much that. So, and I think you've taken the key thing today is that there is an appetite here to look broadly, deeply, and transformationally at this issue.
Transformation?
Do we have any further questions? Any further statements by councillors? The mover has a right of reply. Who's already spoken?
Mover.
Oh, mover.
Sorry, sorry for the delay,
apologies.
Mr. Chair. Fully support C. Definitely agree that any ways that we can release the pressure and stress from our people, then I'm all for that. More broadly at B, I guess my only reservation around that is that at what point is this council going to draw a line in the sand with rehashing decisions that had already been made by the Commission? Because my concern is that we're going to spend a lot of time on some of the decisions that they made for sake of transparency, being an elected membership, and points that have already been raised. And we can relatively assume that the process they took as a commission is much the same that we receive now. They likely would have received issues and options around PC33. The experts that you referred to, Councillor Morris, which I'm sure you'll respond to, around some of this advice will be the same experts that we are going to receive at these meetings. So while I'm all for ensuring that community voice is at the table, my only concern around Section B is how far are we going to go to rehash all the issue or all of the things that the Commission tackled, when we should really be focusing on moving forward with kaupapa that I guess had not been yet addressed rather than those that have been, because we could be spending a fair amount of time on rehashing things on decisions that had already been made quite soundly, in my opinion. Those are my only thoughts on the matter.
Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Exercising the right to reply. For the record, happy to endorse the interpretation of the resolution from council officers, so thank you for that. Secondly, also happy as the mover at your discretion, Mr Chair, for the resolution to be put in parts in case anyone's feeling a lack of comfort about any of the individual resolutions, A, B or C, to be put in parts. Very happy for that as the mover. And thirdly, and finally, last thing I'd say is in terms of land use, these are decisions which impact the environment in the city for thousands of years, if you look at how land use patterns develop over time. So they need to be done well, and if decisions were not made appropriately, the effects are not just on us as a council for 4 years, but it's very much an intergenerational thing, much more than many of the other decisions we will make. Land use has millennial implications. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Councillor Morris. Debate is finished. I now put the following motion forward to be voted on. Councillor Morris has suggested that we do it in parts or in full. Show hands.
Does anyone want parts? No.
Does anyone want it in parts or in full?
Full.
Okay, now put forward a motion that the Vision Planning Growth Environment Committee receives a report, quarterly update, growth, land, planning and transport strategy projects of September 2024. Request staff present issues and options paper on a plan change relating to permitted building height limits and zoning in Mount Maunganui North in early 2025. C. Request staff present issues and options papers on changing or development contribution at time of subdivision and the ability to levy a targeted rate at the time of rezoning in early 2025. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Against? Motion is carried. Thank you. It is now 11:17. I suggest we take a 10-minute break before the motion for a 10-minute break. Everyone return to the table at 11:28. Thank you.
28.
We're on a time limit today. back of the line out. You know.
Point 3, transport major projects updates. Council staff. Council will speak to this.
Brief introduction. So these 5 major grouped together because they represent the 5 largest transport with their partner NZTA. Collectively, the projects value and we'll all recall the imposition that Cameron Road Stage 1 delivery, and it was as a result of that project that we commissioned a report by Messrs Darlow and Tucker something in the order of about 12 months ago. As a result of that, there were one of the primary recommendations was that we set up to deal with these projects because they are not business as usual and they require a different focus, a different skill set, and they say that our business as usual projects don't need. So of the 5 projects, 2 are under construction. West Enabling Works. We have Turrets and 15th obviously just been approved as part of the National Land. Cameron Road Stage 2 and connecting Maunganui are 2 projects. Case changes. So Nick, I think you're going to dive into a wee bit of detail on each of these projects, be supported by Jason.
Yeah, Marty, as part of that introduction, I think it's worth mentioning the partnership component as well, and that when we set up the T5, so the 5 major projects as a separate entity, we also set up an oversight group who gives us advice on commercial, timing, cost, quality issues that the projects may be facing during delivery. So it's a team of best in class that we've collected around the country and agreed in partnership with NZTA to establish that oversight group for the 5 so that we treat it from a one network perspective, because as we've seen with the 2 major projects recently developed, Cameron Road Stage 1 that Marty mentioned, but also the B2B project, which had its issues. I think we recognised from both NZTA and us that there is a different way, there is a better way of planning and delivering these projects. And although it's not a governance board, it doesn't make decisions on behalf of the asset owners. It gives us advice that we can then take on board and use as best we see fit. And that is just as our NZTA partners walk through the door. Welcome. So they're here in anticipation of presenting the Connecting Mount Maunganui project, which we will get to shortly. So actually this presentation I suggest is the 4 major projects and then we finish off with a presentation proper on the Connecting the Mount together with NZTA towards the end. This first report is at quite a high level. We're kind of dipping our toes in here now and trying to get a bit of a feel for what you want out of it. It is our intention in the future to provide you this report with in advance so that you can look at what the issues are we're dealing with and come prepared with questions. It's our cadence on this in the past has been that we have reported them on the day basically, but we think there's value to you and us to be better prepared and get the reports in advance. This is not just meant to be a status report. We think it's important that we bring here the issues that we're dealing with. So a status report is generally just reactive and looking to the past, what we are wanting in the future, and what we are sort of giving you a bit of an indication here is the key issues for each of these projects that we're dealing with at the moment. So you can ask questions or give us governance advice as you see fit. The report touches on 4 things basically: project status, also the funding sources, the next steps, and the key issues. And the key issues, we think, today and in future reports is the thing that will be, I guess, insightful to us in the development of those projects. Let's go to the next slide. You'll be familiar with this, so this is basically just a map of where they are and who's looking after them, and a timing for construction. I think this is ground we don't need to spend any particular time on, so we can move on unless there are any questions on that.
Councillor Morris.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Of those 5 projects, I note the Papamoa East Interchange is partially funded through additional targeted rates on Papamoa East residents. Are there any of those additional targeted rates on Tauriko West or Cameron Road or 15th Ave Turret Road or Mount Maunganui residents, or is it just the Papamoa East Interchange?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Thank you, Chair. So it's only the Papamoa East Interchange, but it's not the project capital, it's the cost of capital, so the interest accumulating on that debt, because part of it is to be funded by Te Tumu and that date's unknown. There are no, the only other targeted is through the IFF levy, which is across the whole of the city, so it's not a targeted rate, but it's similar, but there's no other arrangements like that for any of the other transport projects.
This next slide speaks to the funding stacks for each of the respective projects. Out on the left you have them listed, and it gives you basically 4 pieces of information for each of those projects. One is the required funding, secondly the secured funding at this point in time, and thirdly the committed costs, and fourthly the funding stack building blocks between the partners that are contributing. It's probably worth pointing out there that, for instance, the 15th Ave, the second line item, 15th Ave turret, total funding secured is very low at the moment, and like Marty mentioned in the introduction, as you know, you have approved the business case to go to NZTA. They are making their decision whether to support it or not in October, but they have NZTA has allocated funds for that project in the NLTP, so it's pending business case approval, and then the secured funding number would come up by the amount that's in the NLTP. I think that's at about 6. I'll look that up in a minute, but it's that full funding would then be available for the project. We then move into the 15th Ave turret. You have seen this slide before, so I don't, unless there are any questions on the project detail, we did go through that in the council meeting 2 weeks ago. We can move on to the next steps. So there's three particularly critical components to the project at the moment. The first one is the consenting strategy. The second one is the procurement strategy, and that's something that we're, well, particularly focused on at the moment and into the future, because this is where we can de-risk the project and set it up right, to get the risk apportionment right, etc. And we have found, and through recent major projects that we have delivered, well, but by the time you get to the actual delivery, there's not a lot you can do to change the end outcome. The commercial arrangements, the risk apportionment, the contract form, payment methodologies, etc., that needs to be set up correctly up front in order to generate the right balance between risk and value, and get cost certainty, etc. So that's sort of the next step that we're looking into for this project. No decisions have been made particularly on that at this point, but we're getting advice on that and making sure that we set that up correctly so that we can deliver the physical works with best value for money, cost certainty, and the correct risk apportionment. And of course the last bit, which the project is dependent on, which is the NZTA approval or otherwise of the business case in October. Any questions on that particular project?
Councillor Baker. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tēnā kōrua. I just noticed that, obviously it's pending funding, but in the map it's got construction starts 2025, but on page 41, it says, or 15 tab, it says construction starts February 2026. Can we just get clarity on when pending funding, when construction will actually start? And supplementary to that, is it at all possible to actually bring that forward to 2025? Because I noticed that both 15th Ave and Cameron Road Stage 2 both commence in 2026. Would it not make sense to stagger so the disruptions aren't as significant over a 2-year period, considering that's the length of time Turret Road's going to take, according to this information?
Yes, so particularly the Cameron Road Stage 2, there's been a lot of change in our thinking about that since the release of the NLTP last week. So the timing of that is quite different to what it was when this was prepared. But this is probably the point by which I introduced Jason Spencer, who's heading up the team of the T5s.
Thank you. Councillor, just in answer to your question with regards to construction start dates. Construction start dates for 15th Ave Turret at the moment is, as per that slide number 6, it's February 26 currently, due to current methodology that we're seeking through, what we have to do with regards to the pre-construction, our whole line of path and line of sight at the moment, is that's where we're actually going. The first slide that's I'd say is out of date now is a date that we'd have to change on that slide. So it's slide 6 that we're referring to.
And are you able to respond to the supplementary question?
Supplementary question?
Is it at all possible to bring construction forward to 2025, considering how disruptive Cameron Road Stage 2 and this will be, having both commencing at the same time?
With regards to trying to bring a project forward, that'd be pretty difficult to actually do and accelerate, because we know that if we do try and bring projects forward, we'd probably miss something, and we just do need to go through the appropriate consenting strategies, etc. As it stands at the moment with Cameron Road Stage 2 being in the position it is, again, Cameron Road Stage 2 has really probably got a 6-month to an 8-month delay that is being introduced into it at the moment, simply with the fact that it didn't get any NLTF funding, but at the same time with a SSBC that is being, which is a single stage business case, which is being rewritten at the moment for a delivery to NZTA by March 25. By putting 6 to 8 months in this process, we're actually pushing back Cameron Road Stage 2, so it's not going at the same time at the moment.
So I'm hearing it's possible to bring it forward, but it'll just be a bit challenging.
It would be very challenging.
Thank you.
Mayor Mahay?
It's just a question, 2 years to do this project. Is there a way we could speed that up? I guess, we're talking, I've heard NZTA talking about State Highway 1, they're going to close sections and, do it very fast. And I guess from a disruption point of view, this is going to create absolute havoc to our community. So is there, have you looked at ways to mitigate that time that we can, we could just deliver it as quickly as possible and not disrupt our people for years?
Mayor, yes we are. It's part of our strategy at the moment with regards to looking at this project in a way that our procurement strategy is going to be aligned with what the delivery is going to look like. With regards to the type of contract that we're looking at, whether it be early contractor involvement, whether it be open panel, etc., and even the commercial framework that Nick was referring to, at the end of the day, we have a corridor that is very constrained. We have a corridor that, as part of the 3 laning, we're not going to be actually widening any further than what the current corridor allows between curb to curb. The widening is happening mainly across the bridge, which, again, the way that we're looking at the construction methodologies at the moment and the discussions that we're having with some of the principal contractors around this, we are looking at ways of accelerating or trying to ensure that we have as much minimal disruption to the local traffic as we possibly can. That may mean that we have to do 24-hour working, 3 shifts in every 24 hours to make sure that we can get especially the bridge area done as quickly as we possibly can. We're looking at some of the time frames with regards to early January, which is times that people are on holiday quite a bit, that we actually shut that bridge for maybe 2 weeks so we can get just the bridge done at a time. But a lot of these strategies are in flow at the moment, and we're taking a lot of discussions through to reaching an outcome.
Okay, thank you. That's fantastic to hear that you are looking at that, and I think working 24/7 to minimise the disruption would be a fantastic solution. Thank you.
Councillor Shaw.
Thanks, through the Chair. Obviously with the plans, obviously using the current bridge, and that, like you just talked about, some of those, it's obviously going to be a major logjam. Have you considered within that something like with the flooding on the East Coast, Bailey bridges or things that would further speed up and make you able to work 24/7, or what? I mean, obviously you're looking at a whole range of options. Respect that.
Councillor, yes we are. There's a number of constructability reviews that we're actually doing at the moment. Those constructability reviews take into consideration from Bailey bridges for a possible outcome through to how we're actually going to take people through that particular bridge at a particular time of the day, etc. As I say, many people always think about the bridge as being the constraint. It's not necessarily the constraint, it's the whole corridor as we try and actually build that into stages as we work through the corridor.
Councillor Kirk. Councillor Crowther.
Thank you. Oh, here we go. Yeah, thank you. I'm just wondering if you can clarify the various numbers. The total funding required 104 million. The long-term plan showed 131 million with 22 for waters. That's now been updated to 25 million. The NLTF text says 64 million. The NLTF table says 90 million, of which 33 million is in the 24 to 27 period. So in other words, based on the NLTF, we'll be getting roughly half the funding in this 3-year period and half presumably in the next one. But I'm failing to see how those numbers sort of stack, given that this 104 seems to be the core one in our presentation today.
That's the resilience difference.
Yeah. Are we, sorry Councillor, are we talking about 15th Ave only here?
Well, I'm talking 15th turret, like, and presumably the stage one that went through. I presume we're talking about the same.
Correct, but just...
Yeah, sorry, yes, page 5 of that document,
Yep, if I just refer you to page 6, where we've given that a bit more of a breakdown, the total funding required for the 15th Avenue Turret Stage project is 156 million. Total funding secured at the moment is 4, with a committed cost of 1, paid to date 4, and the remaining budget 152. I've just put in bold letters below that graph how the SSB of 82.6 is broken out, just to give you a little bit more.
Can we just pause for a second, please? Through the chair, can you clarify where it is?
We don't actually have that page that you're referring to in the slides that are presented to us at the moment. So,
oh, okay, that's...
No, this is the one you're talking to.
This is what I'm talking about.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's different numbers to what's here. So, which again, like that presumably includes the waters number. If I can go through the chair to ask that.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. So going back to the transport, maybe just I know we're in a bit of a deadline. If you go back to the transport, can you clarify, particularly the funding through the NLTF, the complete funding for the project, which doesn't stack with what I understood we were proceeding with for the legs of the project that we're proceeding with. It seems like there's a mismatch. There's not enough money in the NLTF to match that. I'm just trying to understand if there's some other funding lying around somewhere that I'm not understanding.
Is that the 22 million for the...
yes, it is.
For the resilience.
Yep. With regards to, there's a resilience package that was part of the SSBC, which was $22 million, as well as a pavements package that was part of the SSBC at $12.3 million. The SSBC was at 83, so that came out at 115 at a P50, and the P95 equivalent to the 115 is up at 130, and that's when we actually add on $25 million for waters to get to 155, which then breaks the total funding that we've got up there. It matches that. I'm sorry, Council, we've got an updated version of the figures for this month, because the one that you have in front of you was right as of the 8th of August, and we wanted to update it for this month.
Right, actually, yeah, thank you. I think that's come clear to me. It may not be clear to the others, but I can also share, if they haven't seen the table, Nick, that has been shared. That will help, I think.
Yeah, that's right. So we will upload a table of those cost breakdowns onto Stella, so that you can all have that at your fingertips. But in essence, there are a couple of other activity classes that contributes to the overall costs.
yeah, the table that Nick and Jason are referring to is now on Stella. Yeah, a bit of confusion at the start because we were looking at different slides. But yeah, any more questions regards this slide and 15th turret? Thank you, Nick. Move on to the next one.
So the Cameron Road Stage 2 project, as you know, it's hit a snag in terms of its business case approval process. So we're going through, making sure we get that updated to align with the government policy statement. The Cameron Road Stage 2 is obviously a very important one for us, and it kind of goes on from the conversations this morning, and which is also why we are taking the T5 projects to this committee rather than the Program Management and Monitoring Committee, because of the impact these projects have on land use, growth, housing supply, etc. So Cameron Road Stage 2 is really important in its own right, but particularly to realise the benefits from the Stage 1 project. This has been looked at from a holistic way, actually, both, or the three components is Cameron Road Stage 1, then through to, from the hospital through to Bucks Corner, but beyond that actually as well, from Bucks Corner through to Tauriko on the state highway. So 3 stages in effect to complete the complete benefits of this project. But in order to meet the travel demands of the future of Te Papa Peninsula, that's basically what this is needed for. We put it up originally with only the draft of the GPS available to us. So there's a committee within NZTA that assesses the business cases before it goes to the board, and that's called Value, Outcome and Scope Committee, the VOS committee. They came up with some follow-up recommendations for us, but despite that, the board decided to decline the business case. We were hopeful that it was going to approve it, but with those criteria basically for us to follow up on. Now that didn't happen. So we are going through the process and we'll have a business case ready for NZTA to have a look at early next year. Next slide. Next slide. So in order to get to that point, we need to bring together a strategy for how we update the SSBC to meet the demands of the new GPS. That's a very important step for us, and this is that first bullet point is our very sharp focus at the moment. We will make sure that we get some trusted advisors along with us in order to give us the best advice on how to get that alignment. The next bullet point, come back a little bit. So we're working on that business case now up until February 25 and submitting to NZTA in March 25. So that's our timing at the moment. Now, we did have a contract, or we do have a contract with GHD to do scheme design of the concept and do some engagement and consultation with the community. That's been ongoing, and we had some time pressures on this, right? So we had put quite some urgency around this in case it was approved through the NLTP process. Now that didn't happen, so that also means that we need to reset a bit about our expectations of GHD and the services that they support, because we take the foot off the throttle. It's a point to understand here as well is that the costs that we're carrying at the moment, they're on us. So, which means that it's everything we spend on the project up until this point is carried by TCC. So the risk is on us, and in order to progress it as quickly as possible, that decision was made that we take that risk in anticipation of a business case ultimately being approved. Then if it is approved, NZTA will contribute with their normal contribution to the project cost. So it's obviously really important to us that we get that across the line. that's the last bullet point, that the costs are being borne by TCC at the moment until such time a business case is approved. Any questions on that project?
Councillor Crowder.
Just, sorry, just the obvious one. How much is the running total at the moment on us?
We have committed. Have a look here.
Paid to date 2.4. So committed cost 5.8.
So, yeah, is it the 6, in other words, that it says committed, or is it closer to the 2?
This one here.
That's committed, that's what we're in for. 5.8, that's what we've gone for, but that's what we've paid to date.
Yeah. So the paid to date is the costs to date, basically just under $2.5 million, and contractual commitments are up to 5.8.
So that's through the chair. So that means right through until February 25. That's the contractual commitments, or are we talking about an extra contract needed?
No, and actually that contract is under review. So had we stuck to the original plan and with the original scope, and we would have, and if the business case had been approved and in the NLTP, that would have been the committed cost. So the reset now means that we renegotiate what the suppliers are doing for us in order to get to the point that we need to be in March. So the committed one through the contract will be smaller than than the number that's there. I hope. Yeah.
Correct.
I think Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've been given, it's probably not the right word, external funding for Cameron Road Stage 2. In terms of those committed costs and the work on the ongoing business case, are the costs of those able to be drawn from that external funding?
Quite possibly, and we will be going through a renegotiation process of the fundamentals of those agreements.
No further questions on Cameron Road. We'll move on to the Patmar East interchange.
So this project is well underway. It's being delivered by HEB, and over on the right there you see we have a construction contract with them of about $62 million worth of work. We do think, I don't want to jinx anything here, but we do think that we have a healthy contingency on the project to take it through within budget and delivery to time. And if there are any questions on the project layout or overview, happy to take those. Otherwise, we can move to the next slide.
Councillor Morris.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I know Blue Haven and their aspirations in the publicly available documents have housing on the southern side of the Tauranga Eastern Link. Is that able to be accessed via the Papamora East interchange, or would it be Tara Road, or would it be a...
Just through the chair, just checking with Andy, so you could enable access, but it would need more investment in a leg than what this current design has. So you could link to it, but you would need to build another road connection.
Yes.
Are we enabling that under the present scope of works, or?
So,
No,
We-
we're not, because it's not confirmed as a land use pattern. So in effect, it's future-proofed. And the one thing that the previous council did do was to approve investment in a duct that would enable you to put telecommunications and water pipes through the structure of this interchange to service the other side. I can't remember, somewhere in the vicinity of about $1 million, something like that, to future-proof it. That investment was made because it would be very hard and very expensive to retrofit it. So that has been done, but it wasn't determined that any other investment would be sensible at this point in time.
Through the chair, that option was provided to the developer in the early design stages at a cost, obviously. They chose not to take it up at that point in time.
Challenges and next steps. It's on time and to budget, and one of the challenges we have there is working on a live, close to a live state highway, which we will ultimately be working above. So there's safety issues with that. All of the issues we've had to date, we've overcome, and obviously significant planning going into the methodology of doing any further work out there. We have a minor delay in some of the piling work. We think we can overcome that by tweaking the plant and having the contractor tune it a little bit. It's in their very best interest to get up to the 10 pounds per day. They're not quite meeting that at the moment, so we're keeping a close eye on the program impact that may have. We also have a design team that's very close to the critical path, so that's probably the second risk at the moment. It's hand to mouth at the moment, and we're doing what we can to speed that up and make sure that any design issues or notices around design or changes that need to be made are coming through on time, not to delay or cost us anything. Any questions on those issues?
Councillor Crowther.
Just clarification, you might want to refer to the next slide too, that we've got 79 million, which has been repeatedly quoted, so it seems like a solid number. Then we've got total funding required of 100 million, and the difference of 21 million is the same number that's listed under other funding. I'm just wondering what is that other funding? What is it that elevates that, given it's not a waters component?
That's probably the same. Renewals.
I think it's renewals.
Yeah, whisper it.
Those other numbers are generally renewals where there's a water associated cost that can be carried by the transport team. Oh.
Kia ora, I'm Chris Barton. I'm the project manager for Papamoa East Interchange. So just in answer to that, there's so 79 million of the project has been broken into different phases. So we've previously referred to it as phase 1, phase 2 and phase 3. So the $79 million is the project budget for the phase 3 component, but the overall $100 million also incorporates the phase 1 and 2 components. So those are previous enabling works which have already been completed. So we can take that back and make sure it's clearer in future reports as well.
Supplementary? Can you clarify then where that 21 million stages 1 and 2, where the other funding is, given it's not TCC funding? I'm just curious who paid for it.
Yeah, you go.
So across the project as a whole, the project is funded 51% by NZTA, and the rest is funded through a combination of the TCC share. So it's a coincidence that $21 million looks like that. It's part of the overall funding stack, and the cost contributions are shared across that overall broader project. So yeah, so it's not specific to that $21 million.
Thank you, Chris.
No more questions for the Papamoa East. We'll move on to the Te Reko West enabling works.
So this has been talked a little bit about already today. This is our biggest project ever, any category, civils project, so relatively high risk, high complexity, for the purpose of enable housing supply. So just in terms of managing expectations, it's sorting some safety issues and some throughput issues on the state highway, but generally the purpose of the project isn't to resolve the access across the Kaimais to Tauranga or the other way, but as the title suggests, enable further housing. Next slide. And this is a project that's delivered by NZTA on our behalf. That was a decision that was made early on in terms of operating and developing a project on a very critical state highway corridor. One of the key premises of the T5s and the oversight group is that you get people in who has done this sort of thing before. So we don't want to cut our teeth on any of the deliverables of the 5 Ts. We have an unresolved program extension at the moment, which is being negotiated, and that was triggered by negotiations in order to get the project de-risked for us as much as possible. Meant that we probably spent 2, possibly 3 months negotiating the contract terms and the finer details of it before we finally could award it and give the contract a position of site. That was meant to have happened early summer. It now happened earlier on this year, and that's a delay that we are working through with the contractor at the moment. There's also the Omanawa Bridge project that was mentioned earlier on, and questions asked about the 4-laning or otherwise of it. In order for us to have complete clarity of visibility of the numbers around this, we're seeking sort of a separation between the two. It hasn't been obvious to us in the reporting, but obviously that's something that's important to us so that we can keep an eye on the numbers and how it's going. The 4th bullet point there, we're going through, or have been going through value engineering sessions around this, and we have found a deduction in scope that can potentially save us a few millions. We don't quite know what that number is yet, but that's around a retaining wall along the highway. So we're working through that at the moment, and as the project was set up, we had some issues around the project management capability and capacity. NZTA and the contractor responded well to that, so that's now set up, and it's quite early days, but early indications are good, so we just keep monitoring that and making sure that it's managed by the right people and we have the right team on the job. And of course, the last challenge that we should mention here is the traffic management on that project will be absolutely critical, both from an operational perspective, but as we know, with high volumes, from a reputational perspective as well. It'll be a critical part of the delivery of this project. And we, of course, the early days for us on how that's going will either give us the ticket to play on the other projects from the community or not. So for us to do a good job there is really, really important. A high-level overview of the financials. Ending up at $237 million, which is about $35 to $40 million more than any other project we've delivered in the past. So that was the Waiari water treatment plant. And for this project, there are various funding sources. There's NCTA funding, developer contribution, TCC funding, of course, and IAF funding and IFF funding, both contributing to this project as well. Any questions on funding stack?
Yes, Councillor Crowther.
Not on the funding stack, but I'll take the liberty through the chair. I'm just interested, when the Minister was in Tauranga earlier this year, he stated very clearly that he wanted more than 2,400 dwellings in there, and he said he was instructing NZTA to ensure that happened. And of course there are a number of people in the city who the last thing they want is more than 2,400 dwellings in there without a highway upgrade. So do we know, and I don't know who's the person who will answer this, whether it's Christine or, but do we know where that conversation between the Minister and NZTA is at?
So, for the chair.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, and Andy might need to help me just check my understanding is correct, but the number of dwellings that can happen, so the plan change provides for 4,000 homes and it has a series of triggers in there, and there's a trigger of 2,400 which is linked to the completion of the enabling works. That's been based on a technical transport assessment that's been undertaken to say what could you reasonably be able to access onto that state highway based on the enabling works being delivered and what would be unreasonable. We don't have any technical assessments that would justify the 4,000, so at the moment the plan change is progressing on the basis of the 2,400 trigger remaining in place and supported by the technical work.
Yeah, through the chair, just adding to that, we don't have any submissions asking for more homes based on the enabling works or less homes based on the enabling works, so it seems like the scope of the independent hearings panel that will consider the matter is pretty limited, so it's unlikely to change.
Through the chair. Supplementary. I guess what the Minister seemed to be saying quite clearly was that he wanted to override the process, and there were developers in the room and people in this room might well have been in that room. So it was very blatant that he is saying that will happen. And a private discussion as well. I'm just very interested in whether there is a way to get some kind of political insight. Maybe this is just for the Mayor to add it to his list for the next conversation, but it seems like a critical thing when the evidence is that that will not be good for our system, and yet the politics of it could load up a whole lot more dwellings in there before we can handle it.
So just through the chair, so those comments of the Minister were discussed at our regular Terika West landowner developer meeting, and the landowners chose not to submit to increase the number of homes on the basis of, as Christine mentioned, there was no technical evidence to support the network being able to accommodate that. So like I say, it is a matter that will be considered through that rezoning process, through the upcoming hearing. So that's all I can say.
The Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chair. So I think it's important that council are aware that prior to advancing this project, late last year, we commissioned an independent risk assessment of the funding position of the three developers, the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund, and the liability ultimately that rests with council. This comprehensive reports that I think we need to provide to you through Stella, which I think highlight the process we went through to understand the risk and where the liability sits on this, because ultimately the $80 million IAF funding and the $60 million development agreement or developer agreement funding, collectively it's at $140 million, will only be eligible for that at the time the plan change goes through. So essentially we're carrying all the risk on this and financial liability subject to that zone changing happening. I think it's important that you're aware of that.
I've got a question. It's in relation to the traffic flow. Once the enabling works at Redwood Lane is completed, the roundabout's all in, have you done a traffic flow analysis on how much of our local traffic's going to start using the business estate as their thoroughfare?
Yeah, that one's actually still being worked through at the moment. We've got another project that we're working on, which is arterial routes, which we're doing all the modelling for, all around the Tauriko region. And that takes into consideration a number of projects, and Tauriko Enabling Works is one of them. But we're due to finish that in about next 2 weeks.
Thank you for that. And flow on, that's going to have a large impact on some of the businesses inside that estate, and parking at the moment is going to be limited. How are we going to manage that through the construction phase so that businesses that are currently in the business estate are not adversely affected by this?
This can be done on a number of ways, but the modelling is actually going to really point to what that actually looks like and what our review will actually undertake, as in what our actions will be. So we want the modelling to speak to that first, and then we'll report back on what additional works we'll have to do.
Okay, thank you very much. Any more questions? Now, as was suggested by Nick at the beginning, we leave the Mount Maunganui project to the NZTA team. You fine with that, Nick?
Yeah, sure. Well, I will actually join the team through that presentation. As we finish up these 4 and ultimately the 5 projects reporting, I think it's really important that we get the best value out of the time we spend on this here. This has probably been more of a status update, and there are different ways we can do that. One way is that you give us feedback on what you want to see in future reports and how you want that presented. That would be really useful for us. And also that we could choose at the various meetings to do a deep dive on 1 or 2 projects in particular, where we do spend a little bit more time to go into specific details on methodologies and risks and programming, traffic management, those sorts of things. So, or particularly, possibly how, since this is the Planning and Vision Committee, that one aspect could be about its contribution to the growth component and housing supply, those sorts of things. So just highlighting the fact that we would welcome any feedback on how you would like this to be reported in the future, so that you get the best value from it, and that it's an insightful conversation that gives us something to work on as well.
Thank you very much for that.
All right, thank you. Well,
Right, there's no further questions. We'll receive the report.
need some more chairs up here, don't we?
Right, can I have a mover and a seconder to receive this report, please? Councillor Crowther and Councillor Kudak receive the report. Councillor Crowther, do you wish to speak to the report?
guess I'll just, in the interest of time, just focus my comments at this stage on Cameron Road. I have a real concern that we're going to end up being caught between two extremes here. One of them is to do a minimal intervention because of cost pressures. The other one is to do a very expensive and possibly unattainable intervention that will future-proof that road and make it suitable for intensification. And when I've looked at the plans and talked to a number of people about it, including project managers and so forth, I'm not at all convinced that we have the balance right on that. I know there's work being done to reassess it, but I think we're still in grave danger of trying to look at too limited approach, particularly at Greeton and pinch points. And my understanding is it won't deliver what is needed in the long run, and it's still an awful lot of money to invest in that project. And as we'll hear next, that connecting Mount Maunganui is an absolutely critical project for the city that is not in our current long-term plan. So I think everything needs to be contextualised around the need to invest in the priority projects, of which connecting Mount Maunganui ranks far higher in the transport system plan. And you know, fundamentally we have nowhere near enough funding available, and I think we're 6.5 billion short according to Ann Tolley. So every single thing that we commit money to has to be top priority, and I'm not convinced still that Cameron Road Stage 2 is a top urgent priority for the design that's being likely to be presented.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Kudik, you got to speak to the motion? No. Possibly my only comments on this whole Cameron Road Stage 2 thing, it's a two-layered event. There's the road on top we've got to fix, and it's all the water infrastructure under the road that we've got to repair in order to meet our housing growth, our housing development, and also future-proof Tauranga into the future. It's a very delicate balance we're trying to achieve here, and I thank everyone for their comments today. That being said, I now recommend that the Vision Planning Growth Environment Committee receives a report from the Transport Major Projects Upgrade Review. Councillor Morris.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, a little cough there. Yes, speaking to the resolution on the table, I'm bound to say that a geographical targeted rate on a transport project in a city our size geographically doesn't make a lot of sense in my view. I'm referring to the Papamore East interchange. I could see how if there was a project, for example, in Warkworth, how it might not be appropriate for ratepayers in Pukekohe to be paying a targeted rate on that, given that there's over 100 kilometres in distance between them. But when we're looking at our city, I think it's often been said we've got to be big enough to admit that we're small. And as the fourth smallest of the cities and districts in New Zealand, it doesn't make a lot of sense to be targeting a geographical targeted rate on a transport project in a city of our small geographic size. I mean, for example, we're only a third the size of what Palmerston North City Council area is. So in the next annual plan / long-term plan amendment, wherever that falls, I'll certainly be pushing on behalf of the Papamore East community to ensure that the Papamore East interchange interest component is funded across the city. I think that's fair and equitable. It removes the double standard because at the moment it's making the Papamore East residents pay for that interchange is a bit like making a child who lives next door to a community playground pay for the whole playground when it actually belongs to the whole community. Thank you.
Any more comments, feedback? Alright. Now, just put the motion that the Vision Planning and Growth Environment Committee, A, receives the report Transport Major Projects Update, and B, reviews and approves the update and provides any queries back to the Major Projects team via an action register. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Opposed? The motion is carried. Thank you. Right, we now move to item 8.4 on the agenda, connecting Mount Maunganui projects update. Nick, along with Chris, is speaking to us, and along with members from the NZTA are joining us, Jess and Ben, I believe. And one more.
Yeah, so I can do the introductions there. Thank you, Chair. So closest to me we have Jess Andrews, who's the Regional Manager System Design. Next to her is David Spears, Regional Director, for a little while longer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Ben McPherson, who's the Project Manager for the Connecting the Mount project. If we start to go through the slides. So I'll just set a bit of context scene here in terms of the UFD and TSP connections. But in terms of the agenda, we'll go through the introductions. I think it's good when the NZTA team starts off that they tell us a little bit about where they fit in and what they do. I'll talk a little bit about the Urban Form and Transport Initiative and the Transport System Plan, and then I will hand over to these guys to work through the detail of Connecting Mount Maunganui project and finish off with some questions. So this here you may recognise as the UFD Connected Centres blueprint for the Western Bay Area. It's possibly more of a land use plan than it is a transport plan, but it does tell us about what the transport demand is into the future. In developing it, it came out of, its origin was actually from the 2017 election, where there was quite a shift in direction from the previous government policy statement to the new one. So it was pretty much back to square one in terms of the planning and development of the transport network for Tauranga in order to meet the demands of that particular GPS. And as this was developed, one critical component of it was to find a reasonable balance between the live, work, learn and play in order to balance the centres and mitigate transport demand. So you try to have all of those functions in the various centres in order to, as much as possible, lower the traffic volumes on the road. Because this was more of a land use plan and the future of transport need, it didn't give us the list of interventions that the region needed to do. And in order to develop that, we created something called the TSP. So that's the Transport System Plan. If we go to the next slide, please. So, of course, knowing what the future, or assuming the future look through the connected centres, we went into a bit more detail to create what the program of interventions would look like. So what's the list of projects over the next 30 years that will give us those transport outcomes? So that was the initiation of the Transport System Plan. And we realised also that this couldn't be done by each asset owner or operator in isolation, but this would have to be a partnership. So TSP is quite unique in the country, I think, in that it gives us an agreed program ranked in order of priority of the transport investments for the future, and that's between Western Bay of Plenty, NZTA, the Regional Council, and ourselves. And go to the next slide. We wanted to put up here the network levels of service for the future, and this is probably more for the purpose of limiting expectations about what the TSP will do. Transport planners keep telling us that we're not going to build our way out of congestion, and there is a large element of truth to that. So if you have a look at the slides up there, you have the levels of service in the current network on the left, and black basically, the black dot basically means that there's limited movement or close to standstill. There is some movement, but the delays are significant. And then that clicks through the red, purple, blue and green. So green is a network that operates to the posted operating speeds without any significant other impacts. So if we do nothing, and you have a look at the 2048 do minimum scenario on the right, when you get lots of big dots like that, that means that you pretty much grind the network to a halt. You're running beyond capacity at lots of parts of the network, so even a nose to tail could mean that a very, very slow moving traffic as a no moving traffic. And if we go to the next slide. So the first slide there is the same that you had on the previous page, and we just wanted to compare that to the 2048 option of investing according to the TSP and what's in the program already. So that just gives you a sense of actually TSP not solving all of the transport problems that Tauranga faces, and that we need to do other things as well. Included in this modelling to generate these numbers are the growth, of course, but assumed mode shift numbers, behavioural change and that sort of thing. So this isn't just the current transport volumes translated into the future. There's an element of things changing here, but despite that, the building component of the future of transport for Tauranga it doesn't actually solve all the problems. So that's just a bit of a context setter for what the future will hold, and to lead into what we're expecting the Connecting the Mount Maunganui project to do as well. So I will hand over to Jess, David and Beth. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou. Just picking up on Nick's suggestion to introduce myself. So for those who don't know me, I'm Jess Andrew. I'm the Regional Manager for System Design for Waikato and Bay Planning. So system design to translate as kind of our planning and investment side. So we work with you guys on the investment in your projects, but also on the planning of state highway projects or like these. I'm based here in Tauranga at Papamoa Beach, so I'm a local resident who drives this little bit of road quite often, so know it well. Next slide please, on here. So the left hand here, when UFTI and TSB were created, a huge focus, as you'd expect, was understanding how traffic moves around and across our harbour, because that dictates effectively our transport network, and looked at what the options there, and any transport network in Tauranga has to be built around that and understanding those movements. What we did with connecting Mount Maunganui was to then go, okay, well, we know that one of the key movements is across the existing Tauranga Bridge, but also that linkage with 29A. And we narrowed in on the area which includes Hewlett's Road, but also includes Totara Street, Hull, and the Mount Industrial area and Maunganui Road. So hence it's a joint project which looks at the state highway, but also all of those key connections on the local roads in the areas and within that. Next slide. When we started the work, we were lucky enough that we were timed in parallel with the Mount Spatial Plan. So there's been a lot of community engagement led, particularly by TCC through that, and we were able to join in and be part of that rather than needing to kind of confuse the community and go with both of us at the same time. We went together with your team, which was a fantastic way to engage with the community and have that broader conversation. Alongside that, we've surveyed, met with a number of key members in the community, particularly in that Mount Industrial area, and done our own engagement on top of it, but tried to focus as much as possible on the Mount Spatial Plan. We took an approach which is called segmentation of users, where we really looked at what are the key types of users here. Mount Maunganui and Hewletts Road, you all know, has the privilege of trying to serve everyone, and in a very small area, which makes it incredibly complex from a transport planning perspective, but also quite interesting. So we kind of worked particularly through some of the survey work that we did to really understand what each of those types of users, be it as cyclists, our bus users, the car vans, so we really looked into those commercial vehicles. What are those plumbers, builders, the people who have to drive because they've got tools in the back, because they've got parcels in the back, for some reason they really need that. What do they need? Our trucks, so our big freight going to the port, really important, but not as high a number as something like those commercial vehicles. Those who are walking, and things like your taxi movements around there, what do each of those people need? Why are they using? When do they need to use? Versus, what degree of flexibility they have, and digging into actually understand those users. What we did then was create a very long list of ideas, effectively, of ways that you could look at here. So we had over 170 ideas. I'm assured that it included a gondola. Somebody else has recently suggested a hovercraft. I don't know if we had a hovercraft, but it was everything you can think of and a little bit more, and really looked across what are all the ways you could solve this, and then relatively quickly you narrow that down by realising a gondola is probably not the answer, as much as I would love to build one, and you start to look at what are our key interventions, which is where you get to your shortlist. And you can see here, next slide, so the shortlisted interventions looked across a whole bunch of things. Obviously there's a lot of opportunity in the local industrial area where you can look at connections and opportunities in them, and that's a real focus of the solution here, is connecting up on some of those dead-end local roads, and there makes an enormous difference for the transport movements. We have a lot of vehicles that go in and then have to come out again, either onto Totara or onto Hewletts Road, and each of those creates kind of unnecessary movements at intersections, which slows everybody else down. We looked at that Maunganui Golf Road, Link Road kind of intersection there and the opportunities at that one. Looked at how we can improve the intersections along Hewletts Road. Grade separation of the Hewletts-Totara intersection, which I'm sure you know well. We looked at the bus lanes along Maunganui Road. Improvements to the streetscape, cycle and walking options, bus stop upgrades, and we're also going to talk a bit more about the opportunity to repurpose and widen the use of the bus lane on Maunganui Road. As you can see from the funnel shape, effectively what happened is over time these narrowed down with inputs across a whole range of specialists. So we bring in all sorts of different specialists to give us views, and we also overlay those, what do the community want in their priorities. Next slide. And just, I'm not expecting you to read this, but we use what's called a multi-criteria analysis to assess and rank each of those options and to understand how they perform against a range of criteria. And here's an extract from one of those in order to come up with your preferred option. And that's what we're here today to do. Given that you're new, this project has a long history, but we really wanted the opportunity to get in front with together as a team and talk you through where that's going ahead of coming for any sort of formal endorsement. And now if we can go to that next slide, and we'll take you through the one. Now I'm not sure what's in your final pack, but the diagram that was up on the screen before was an old one that wasn't actually the correct description, so just make sure you disregard that, and this is the correct diagram. So the preferred option, Nick's already kind of pointed out the fact that this is something that gives us a lot more use on the network, but it doesn't solve all of the problems in the world, but it hugely improves the performance of this and allows us to keep people moving through here and keep freight moving through here. So it's a combination. If I stop, I'm going to start at the top left of the green box, just so we'll go around in kind of an anti-clockwise circle. So the east-west protected cycleways. So you'll know that Totara Street and Hewletts Road had cycleway upgrades done in the last few years. Those are seen as really important connections, but they're not not the ideal long-term solution. We think there is a long-term solution through that Mount Industrial area
This is at what we call an indicative business case level, so it's still, at a relatively high level. We haven't, defined exactly where that would go, but we have started conversations with people like the port about how you create a safe pathway through there for cyclists. There is a really strong contingent of cyclists through this area, and a real push for that ever increasing opportunity there. We're looking at extra lanes on Totara Street between Hull Road and down to Hewlett's Road, so looking at taking that from 2 to 4 lanes, so quite a significant widening there. And we're lucky there's quite a lot of width there already, which allows for that to occur. And then we're looking at a grade separated flyover that connects, it comes down Totara Street and connects over towards the Harbour Bridge, and that allows that movement to go freely and then frees up the other kind of vehicle movements around there, and keeps that going. Along Hewlett's Road itself, looking at some simple bus stop upgrades along there, because there aren't really bus stops, there's just signs at the moment, so just looking at some simple upgrades there. And then the big one is your blue one, is again not yet designed in complete detail, but looking at connecting up some of those dead-end streets within the Mount Industrial area in order to allow those vehicles, especially those commercial vehicles, there's a lot of commercial freight vehicles moving in that area, to move freely. Again, not fully designed, but conversations have started with the likes of the port, who own an enormous amount of the land in there, to go, okay, what are the opportunities in here and how do we do that? It's definitely something that needs to be done in conjunction with the businesses there, because there's a lot of fascinating but complex nuances in who owns what and who goes where, and how vehicles move in there. But a lot of enthusiasm for that, so really positive opportunities in there. Again, just keeping the protected cycle facilities on Maunganui Road as well as something that looking at in the longer term about the opportunity to maintain those. The kind of, I guess, key next thing just to point out here. So the delivery of this, the idea is that it gets broken up in stages, and there's probably 2 key reasons for that. One is obviously money, but the other really crucial one is constructability. It doesn't take much to know that building anything here is going to be really, really challenging, and how we do it will need to be really carefully thought through. The first bit is looking at the optimisation opportunities, and ideally there's a little connection at the end of Te Maire linked to Newton, which could be done really quickly because TCC already owns the land there. So looking at those as quick wins, and I'm going to talk a bit more about the managed lanes in a moment. The second stage becomes those local road connections. A couple of reasons for that. One is it delivers huge benefits for the overall transport network. All pieces benefit from that. And the other bit is that is really crucial in order to be able to construct the flyover. You need to be able to divert traffic around it, and at the moment we don't have that opportunity. So we want to do, by connecting up there and working with the port, there's the opportunity to do that without basically breaking that bit of the network when you then come to try and build a grade separated flyover at the bottom of Totara Street. So you stage it out that way with those kind of being your key lanes. The last thing I wanted to take you through in our whirlwind kind of tour before we start on questions is around the opportunity on Maunganui Road. So you'll be aware there's a bus lane on Maunganui Road at the moment, which is a hugely valuable kind of asset for the city. But we've had a look at... Hewlett's Road, sorry, thank you, Mia. Hewlett's Road. Look at the opportunity in the short term to convert that into what we call a T3 lane. So that's a lane for people who've got 3 or more people in their vehicles. And by doing that, what you're able to do is you're able to maintain the reliability of the bus network, but you're able to spread the traffic load on Hewlett's Road out a bit more, and everyone gets a faster and easier ride. So there's benefits for all users, for your freight, for kind of all of your general traffic users, and you're able to maintain that bus reliability. That would be done in a way where you had triggers for when it could go back to being a bus lane once the bus frequency gets up to the level where it needs that again. But we've done quite a lot of modelling and working and talking with your staff and team, and the view is there's an opportunity there that we can offer the community, that gives a bit more capacity for this, and we can do that relatively quickly, and just builds on the existing enforcement that's already happening there. That's something that, would take we're looking at about a year to implement that, and then that has extensive community engagement, so we'd need to consult the community about that and understand the community support for doing that and whether they want to make that change. But given the high degree of kind of benefit across the board, it seems like something, we're hoping that could be a real win for our communities. Happy to take questions.
Yes, Mayor.
Yeah, thank you for explaining all this. This is a part of the road that I use a lot, and my kind of worry about having a flyover from Totara Street is actually not going to solve any issue at all, because the real issue is the traffic lights on Hewlett's Road, which backs up everything. So have they looked at the if you actually went a flyover on Hewlett's Road over Totara Street, there would actually solve most of your issues, because that's the pinch point. In my mind.
Kia ora koutou. I'm Ben McPherson. I'm the project manager for this project and working with NZTA, also based in Tauranga, so nice to meet you all. In response to your question, Mayor, with the flyover, it allows unimpeded right turn movement for vehicles travelling south on Totara Street and travelling westbound on State Highway 2. I guess a key point of that is that it allows more green time for the through movement, which is essentially what a straight through flyover, as you're proposing, would support. The analysis to date shows that the right turning moving traffic heading south on Totara Street at the moment, in terms of capacity versus demand, we're sort of in the order of 95%. We're essentially at capacity. So providing that flyover provides that unimpeded right turn movement for more efficient traffic flow. So that is really critical in delivering improved outcomes. And also, if we were to completely release that through movement along Hewlett's Road, we have picked up from considering another shortlist option that there could be wider impacts on the network, particularly in the likes of Elizabeth Street. So we have to be careful in what we do, because the Tauranga transport network is so sensitive that what we do in one part of the network does have a ripple effect, and so we ought to consider that as part of our analysis.
Thanks for that, Councillor Crowther.
Yeah, thank you. Good to see you, Jess and David, still hanging in there. Quick question about the money side of it. I understand 292 million for the portion of the project related to TCC, and the costs for the flyover and the additional lanes on Totara Street is about half that. But I'm just trying to. We're talking about that's the TCC related portion, or that's the total?
So an indicative a cost estimate for this proposed program has been undertaken in line with the NZTA SMO 14, which is our cost estimation manual. That's estimated that this project would cost in total $292 million at this point in time. So that is not the TCC portion. The implementation cost share has not yet been agreed, as we're still very early on in the project. At this point in time, we're estimating TCC council share could be in the order of $140 million for the full program. And then there's the NZTA or NLTF 51% share of that.
Did you want to say something now?
Just for context, so that's if we look at that project in terms of 51%, the normal contribution by NZTA, and us doing the rest, whereas we do think, just from an affordability point of view, that we have to look at different funding opportunities here, possibly similar to Tauriko West, but who knows who those partners are. But this is about developing the best, most affordable option for solving the transport problems, and while we do that, we have in mind, of course, affordability and where money comes from, but ultimately that needs to be dealt with as a next step, who pays for what, sort of thing.
Just following up on that, I guess there's two questions really built in, but one of them is, there's a lot sacrificed from this project compared to what was there, like railway separation, grade separation, all these things that one would think would be quite helpful, to say the least. So that's one aspect of the question, but the other is why, if it is the total project cost, why is TCC having to foot 49% of it?
So TCC pays for the local road component of it. We pay for the state highway, and then we pay you 51% of the local road component. So TCC is sharing in the cost here, but the government contributes effectively 2/3 to 75% of that total cost. And I think Nick's right. This is a project with huge kind of economic growth potential that is something that is, you know, well fit for looking at opportunities around funding.
Just to follow up on that, I guess my question should have been maybe Hewlett's Road, the flyover relates to Totara Street, which is a Tauranga City Council road, but it also relates to Hewlett's Road, which is a state highway. I'm still struggling to understand why we pay for the 49%.
So that's being paid for at 100% state highway.
So can we just...
140 mil relates primarily to those local road connections within the Mount Industrial area.
So the 149 is the total NZTA share of the project before the 51% share to TCC.
That's the state highway component, and then we pay half of the local road component.
Okay, so we'll be paying a lot less than the 143.
Half of it. You'll be paying 49% of the 140. Yeah.
Right. I don't know if it was just me, but that didn't seem crystal
Or
clear.
less, yeah.
Or less.
Just, of course, adding, because I can't help myself, these are incredibly early figures. When we're talking in 143s, it definitely won't be 143, but those are our early estimates.
Councillor Taylor.
Sorry, just a question on the 3-laning that you've got there. So if people race up the bus lane, how do they get back into the lane to go over the flyover to get onto Maunganui Road without causing a major problem?
Very astute. Yeah, so so one of the things that we've built into the cost here is there absolutely need to be some safety improvements and some signage improvements for that. So we'll be needing to put some clear signs around getting merging into your lanes really early, because it's correct, if you're stuck in that left-hand lane, you won't be able to, it'll be really dangerous to move over. So what we're going to do is we're going to probably put in some barriers to stop people merging right at the end, but also some signage telling people if you're going to Papamoa, you need to get in that right lane early, rather than realising that 3 intersections through and you're about to hit the flyover. I guess the safety valve is you can still, of course, get around underneath on that Gulf Road roundabout when you realise you've made a mistake, but we're going to try and avoid people needing to do that. So yeah, there is a little bit of safety improvement upgrades that need to do to make that work well.
Already with 2 lanes.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah, and that was one of the reasons that people have put off doing this in the past, but we've worked with our safety team on some ways we can make that as safe as possible.
Do I have any more questions for the NZTA?
Yes. Can you clarify what is the current BCR, benefit cost ratio for this project as it stands?
Yeah, as it stands today, it's 1.4.
Okay. Can I have another question? This may not seem directly related, but I'm assured by experts it is, that short version, when stages 1 to 3 of the Tauriko project are completed, does NZTA still hold that the evidence is that we will not need stage 4 of that project, the bypass, to enable or to cope with the smart growth strategy output of dwellings, which is roughly 10,000 potentially in that corridor. I know that was the view a year ago. Is that still the view today?
Look, we're revisiting the staging in how we approach the Tauriko project in light of the GPS. So I think the modelling still stands, but we are looking at the best way to deliver that project in line with the GPS.
Councillor Shaw. Thank you,
Chair, just a quick question. Obviously, there's a big mix through that first part of Totra Street, port traffic, heavy vehicles, and then obviously commuters or coming from the further up the Mount North. Has there any much consideration or there been discussions, and can you expand a bit on options to use Tasman Quay more for the port traffic or the industrial traffic to create separations?
Yeah, we have had an initial conversation with the port. There's huge health and safety implications for going into that land, and that causes an enormous impact on their operations. So our preference is not to do that, but there is the option potentially during construction of coming to a short-term arrangement around there, and the port has been really constructive in that. But long-term, no, that just becomes much too complex for them and huge health and safety impacts.
Did you say constrictive or constructive?
They've been constructive.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Great. I'd like to thank the NZTA for their presence here today and for all their comments and information. It's been most valuable. We have learnt much. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
If there's no further questions, could we have a motion to receive the report? Councillor Crowther and Councillor Kurak. Councillor Crowther, do you wish to speak to your motion?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I think, I mean, the connected centres, first of all, I'll say thank you again to NZTA for that. It was very, very helpful. The connected centres model and the transport system plan have shown the critical importance of public transport to Tauranga's economic prosperity. And the only thing that ranks higher than having good quality public transport is significant upgrades in Hewlett's Totara. So it's clearly the number one project. I asked the then program director a year or two or 3 years ago if he had high confidence in the analysis that was done in the TSP that said this was the number one project and public transport improvements were number two. And I said, would this change if there was a change in government? The answer was clear, stated publicly, repeatedly, that the list is the list. This will not change. This is our number one project. Public transport improvements are number two. And that has been echoed by a number of people, including whatever his title, what's Dean's title? Dean Kimpton, anyway, Dean Kimpton. So to say it's a critical project is if anything, under-eating it. It's our number one transport project, and transport is the number one issue repeatedly in public surveys in this city. So there's nothing more important, in my view, to TCC. And yet it wasn't included in our long-term plan. Countless hours, hundreds, thousands of hours have been invested in other projects ahead of this. Huge amounts of political capital have gone into it, and money as well, but mainly the political capital, which has pushed other projects ahead of this, and yet this is clearly the number one project. I was a bit gobsmacked at hearing the Tauranga City Council representative on the Regional Transport Committee state that that was because they wanted to do that as a strategy to extract Three Waters funding and then to try to get Three Waters off the books, and it seemed like a better strategy to do that than to take out Cameron Road or take out some other projects. I just do not, still to this day, do not see any logic in that. The number one project is the number one project. It should be in the plan, no matter what. We've got massive rates increases. We've heard the median residential rate will go up 2.2 times what they were last year. So, I fail to understand why, when we've put in non-essential projects, the kind of projects that the Prime Minister and others have said are not critical from his government's point of view, that the people of Tauranga have repeatedly said are not critical from their point of view. This project has been nixed from the plan, makes no sense at all, no matter what you think of the other projects. Either we need to have a discussion that says this project is in here, we cut other projects, or we need to have a discussion that says this project is in there and we add on to the rates burden. To me, this is urgent, it's important, it has to be in a long-term plan amendment. There are a number of moving parts here. There's this project, we've heard just a tiny snippet of the impacts that are going to happen on Elizabeth Street, which will come through with stage 3 of the Tauriko project, and also from the connecting, if connecting Mount Maunganui actually works at all, it will come through from there. So we have another project which is critically important, not in the plan. We've heard Keenan Road is not in the plan, and that's hundreds of millions of dollars. There's plenty of stuff that's not in the plan. If we don't do a long-term plan amendment, and we'll hear the paper, we'll see the paper next Monday at our council meeting, if we don't go down that track, we are backing ourselves into a corner. And lastly, I would say, not grade separating railway lines in that area seems incredibly short-sighted. The strategy for New Zealand's transport emissions is to get more and more freight onto rail. The Minister of Transport has pointed out that they are making the biggest investment ever into public transport, and that they are keen to invest into rail freight. This is the biggest port, two biggest ports in the country, basically, on either side of the harbour. We need to have future-proofed rail connections to and from this port, and to actually not grade separate there will have impacts on the trains, but also on schedules, but also on the traffic in that area. And when you look at what the Port of Tauranga is planning for its freight in, I can't remember the number, maybe 20 years, I can't remember which scenario I saw, but it's gobsmacking. I see Councillor Thompson in the back there, and she will know exactly what's been presented to Smart Growth around that. And we have to actually start getting ahead of this. We are way behind. We're putting other projects ahead of these things. This is critical, and I think we need to elevate this as soon as possible.
Councillor Morris. Oh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that Councillor Crowther's comments are quite apt, and it's not just him saying that as a lone wolf. If you look at tomorrow's agenda with regard to the feedback from the community via key research, you find that 70% of the respondents are satisfied with the public facilities in the city, but only 35% are satisfied with the roading network. And I think that speaks quite clearly to the community's view around the hastily adopted long-term plan, in my view.
Councillor Kudak.
No.
Anyone else wish to speak to the motion? Therefore, I put it to the vote that the committee accepts the recommendation that the Vision Planning Growth Environment Committee A receives a report connecting Mount Maunganui project update. All those in favour?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion is carried. Thank you. Item 9, discussion of late items. Are there any late items? No. Councillor Baker, would you please form the closing karakia?
Tēnā tātou. Ka tāre watunga ki te kōrero ki te rangi ko ia tēnei te whakawātea ki nei tūturu whakamaua ka tīna haumi e hui e tai i e.
Okay, the meeting is now closed, 1:07, and we're adjourning for lunch in here or in the council's lounge? In the councillors' lounge. Thank you very much.
Kia ora.